hours, and then later on in the day some cloud and rain pushing into the southwest. Temperatures up again to the mid-teens, a little cooler in the north.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Michelle Dewberry and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Monday, the 1st of April.
Protests erupt in Edinburgh as Scotland's new hate crime law comes into force today. Despite warnings, the new legislation could be weaponised by fringe activists, waste police time and have a chilling effect on free speech.
All-out war. The Tory party chairman labels Reform UK leader Richard Tice a threatening bully, as Tice claims he has and could release embarrassing personal information on the Tory deputy chairman, Jonathan Gullis. This comes as a shock poll shows Reform could cost the Tories up to 50 seats.
And as Germany legalises the recreational use of cannabis today, we're asking, should the UK follow suit? So this protest in Edinburgh outside Holyrood is due to kick off at 1 o'clock. We've got our Scotland reporter outside Holyrood waiting because there's a lot of anger about this new legislation. Some people say this is progress. This is going to, stop people from being vicious towards each other, stop stirring up hate against different groups based on race, gender, whatever else.
You say gender, Emily, but there's one characteristic that isn't explicitly protected in this legislation.
Men.
Women.
women. Well, there you go. There's quite a lot about transgender women and men, but not much about the females, apparently.
The Scottish Government says they're going to bring forward a separate piece of legislation to deal with the concerns of women, all in due time. We haven't yet seen that piece of legislation, but it is strange, and it has raised a lot of questions as to why are they doing this sort of piece of hate crime legislation that means anyone can report anything for any perceived offence on a whole host of protected characteristics.
Well, you know what,
but not about women's rights.
And we should be listening to the likes of the president of the Association of Scottish Police, Rob Hay. He's warning, essentially, this will be a massive waste of time for the Police Scotland. It will embolden a fringe of activists who will... It'll be on social media, won't it? This will just be more
mainly
policing
social media.
of social media. Someone says something that's deemed transphobic or deemed bigoted in one way or another. The police then have to look into it.
But of course,
this bill
is not limited to online interactions. It's not limited to interactions in public. It also covers interactions in private. Now, if you say something in the privacy of your own home that someone overhears and doesn't like or thinks might be considered hateful, they could report you to the police, and the police would have to investigate it. How many times are we going to see children reporting their parents and then see those sorts of conversations be raked over by the Scottish police? This is opening up a huge web of entangled...
Grandparents come over for Easter lunch. One of them says something a bit backwards and off she goes in cuffs. There you go. That is the scenario we could be seeing potentially in Scotland north of the border. But let us know what you make of this new law. Are you worried about the chilling effect it could have on free speech? Or do you think, you know, stirring up hatred should be a crime wherever it happens? GBViews at gbnews.com. But first, your headlines.
Tom, Emily, thanks very much, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 12 o'clock and we start in Scotland, where, as Tom and Emily were just mentioning, new laws to tackle hate crime have come into effect, which critics say could threaten free speech. The laws bring together existing legislation, making it a crime to stir up hatred against people with protected characteristics, including disability, age, sexual orientation, or people who are transgender. But some police forces have warned that the law could be weaponised by fringe activists to target political opponents. The Scottish Conservatives say resources should be directed towards frontline policing. Well, we asked people on the streets of Edinburgh what they think about those new laws.
You're going to be going out and encouraging snitches and people to go and speak up about people just having a private conversation. You know, the key's in the word private.
The police themselves have said that they are only going to respond where complaints have been raised, and our concern would be that there are campaign groups out there that would be looking to raise complaints in order to silence people that they don't like.
That interpretation of the hate crime speech now could be used very much against us, and it's a recipe for disaster.
In other news, the head of the Nurses' Union has accused the government of, she says, packing hospital corridors with patients, and says that the quality of care in hospitals is not only undignified but fatally unsafe. It comes as new estimates suggest more than 250 patients may have died needlessly every week in 2023 because of long waits in England's hospitals. A report by the Royal College of Emergency Medicine has revealed more than 1.5 million patients waited in A&Es for longer than 12 hours last year. The Department for Health says it, though, has added thousands of hospital beds and insists it is making progress on waiting times. The number of small boats crossing the English Channel illegally is up by 43%. That's compared to the same time last year. Official figures from the Home Office show that 442 people made that crossing in 9 small boats on Easter Sunday. That's despite difficult weather conditions, with lifeboats scrambling to assist some of those arriving. Today's strong winds have now made the journey completely impassable. The new figures are, though, a reversal of last year, which saw a 36% fall compared to record arrivals in 2022. Plans to fine rough sleepers are provoking outrage, with more than 40 Conservative MPs said to be preparing to rebel. The new criminal justice bill would allow police to fine or move on so-called nuisance rough sleepers. It was intended to replace the Vagrancy Act from 1824, which currently criminalises both rough sleeping and begging. But reports suggest the new bill has been paused while ministers negotiate with MPs who are concerned about the consequences of issuing fines to homeless people. Those plans were introduced by the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who branded rough sleeping as, she said, a lifestyle choice. Some households will feel the effects of a cash boost from today as new economic policies come into effect. The national living wage is increasing to £11.44, giving a pay rise to around 3 million of Britain's lowest paid workers. Small businesses will also benefit from a raised VAT threshold and fully funded apprenticeships. Business Minister Kevin Hollinrake told GB News this morning that economic conditions are improving.
We understand it's been difficult, but things are improving. We'll see the economy turning a corner this year. We'll see interest rates dropping, taxes dropping, of course. £900 a year for the average person in terms of tax reductions with the national insurance cuts. So all those things are all good news for people. Of course, there's more to do, but things really are turning a corner.
Meanwhile, working parents of 2-year-olds in England are now entitled to 15 hours of free childcare a week. It's part of an £8 billion package of support for families in effect from today. Labour, though, says it's a pledge without a plan, and some nurseries are also warning that the expansion of available places will put severe strain on the sector. Millions of households will see their bills rise as firms roll out their annual price increases on what's being dubbed National Price Hike Day. Road tax, broadband, mobile bills, water and the TV licence are all going up, as are council taxes in England, Wales and in Northern Ireland. The average council tax bill will rise by £106, while water bills will jump by 6%. However, consumer group Which says there are ways to cut costs. They say if you're out of contract, that switching providers can save up to £187. And finally, to some good news for energy bills. They're due to fall to their lowest rate in 2 years after the regulator Ofgem cut its price cap today by 12.3%. It means the average household bill for gas and electricity will fall by around £238 over the course of a year, or around £20 a month. However, around 10 million households are still being urged to submit meter readings to avoid possibly overpaying. That's the latest from the newsroom for now. In the meantime, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, though, it's back to Tom and Emily.
It's 12:09. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, the controversial new hate crime law has come into force in Scotland. The aim is to tackle the harm caused by hatred and prejudice towards people with these characteristics, such as age, disability, religion, sexual orientation and transgender identity. But Tom picked up on something, didn't you?
It's worth running through these again. The full list that is protected under this new law: age, disability, religion, sexual orientation, transgender identity, or the fact of being intersex, but not women.
Well, I feel very protected in Home's use of Scotland.
Well, to be fair, the Scottish Government say they want to bring forward a separate piece
Just what we need,
of legislation.
More bills, more legislation.
All in good time, I'm sure, that will deal with women. Why they couldn't just add it to the list, I'm not so sure. But it's important to note that there are big opponents to this legislation. People such as J.K. Rowling, Elon Musk, even Peter Tatchell have publicly criticised these new laws, saying they could be used to stifle free speech or even be weaponised to settle scores.
Well, let's cross to our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire, who's in Edinburgh, where there is a protest due to take place at about 1 o'clock, I believe, Tony.
Yes, that's correct. About 1:30 today, and of course, because it's Easter Sunday, it is a Easter Monday. It is a bank holiday, so we're expecting even more. Spoke to a couple of people outside Parliament here already who have said that, they couldn't be here otherwise. But because it is that bank holiday, then they're able to come here and show their support. Now, this is, of course, the highly controversial Hate Crime and Public Order Act. This has been approved by Parliament in 2021, and it's taken this long to come to fruition because Police Scotland really had to get their ducks in a row in order to how to deal with complaints when and they come in. Now, what's interesting is that up in the northeast, a pilot by Police Scotland has meant that police have come out and said that they will no longer be investigating every crime. However, on the flip reverse of that, with this new Hate Crime Act, police have said they've committed, in fact, to looking into every single report. Now, this has ruffled many feathers, including the gender-critical feminist movement, the likes of J.K. Rowling, and of course the group For Women Scotland, who all fought and spoke so loudly during the Gender Recognition Reform Bill conversation, shall we call it, last year. Now, because reports are going to be anonymised, there's seemingly very few safeguards in place to prevent malicious reporting. And one of the groups who is deeply concerned about that is, in fact, the church. Now, I spoke to Pastor Arthur O'Malley. He was representing Eastgate Church in Glasgow over in Elderslie, and he had this to say about his concerns.
Well, it's against this hate crime speech, which is very, very vague, but really if you look deeper into it, it's actually, I think it's going to be used against free speech. Predominantly it's going to then vilify the Christian message, and it could bring us into trouble with the law. It would hinder our great message, which is repent and believe the good news, and that interpretation of the hate crime speech now could be used very much against us, and it's a recipe for disaster. I think even many of the policemen are really up in arms against it, and I think it's just going to be very negative for the nation in general. We are a democratic nation with the ability to be able to speak, and everyone's able to share their views and their own mind, and I think this is going to be used tremendously, not only against the church, but against anyone who is just willing to stand up and to speak out for righteousness' sake.
So just to give you some extra background on that point you were saying about men there, now Russell Finlay, the Scottish Tory Justice spokesperson, he called that hate monster advert, I don't know if you remember that, the kind of silly cartoon from Police Scotland in preparation for this act, he called that grossly offensive because on the Police Scotland website they said that, you know, socially excluded communities who are heavily influenced by their peers and these kind of men, middle-class white men, are the most likely to cause hate crimes, and that indeed in itself has ruffled quite a lot of feathers.
Yes, I'm not surprised. Thank you very much indeed, Tony Maguire, our Scotland reporter there outside Holyrood in Edinburgh.
Tony, we should just say for people watching on television, Tony was replaced by what looked like a cartoon figure of a hate monster. I wonder if we can get this video up again for those watching on television, because this is one of the promotional
Tony
campaigns.
was explaining, yes.
Yes, it is extraordinary to see. I just love watching it again and again, that this is what money has gone into in order to get this law.
Doesn't it make you want to be a better person seeing that?
It's remarkable.
It makes me want to be a better person. Thank you, Tony. Really appreciate your time on that. We'll be back with Tony at about 1:30 as the protest is due to kick off.
And I hope the hate monster as well.
And the hate monster, I'm sure he'll make a return. There you go. Should we speak to the founder of the Academy of Ideas, Baroness Claire Fox? Claire, thank you very much for joining us on the show to discuss this very important matter. I'm hoping we can... Ah, there she is. There you are, Claire. Interesting what the pastor had to say there, because this legislation is supposed to protect religious minorities, supposed to protect religion as one of its identifying characteristics, but actually... He's saying it could actually vilify the Christian message. It could be weaponised, this legislation, to attack the church.
Well, you can imagine that even, you know, you might say you formally protect a religion, but if somebody's views on, for example, I don't know, gay marriage or something of that net, or even sex before marriage, they're saying it because they're Christian, but they don't say it in the guise of being religious. If somebody said that, they're not going to be protected, are they? They're going to be accused of stirring up hate speech in a particular way. And I think, by the way, I think we need to take a step back, because we're all assuming that the problem is that you can be harmed by this speech. And my argument is that you aren't actually harmed by somebody else's speech. It might hurt your feelings, but it's not harm in any substantive way. What's changed in recent years is that we're starting to associate speech the same as an action, as though it's an act of violence. And so, as far as I'm concerned, anyone should be able to say anything they want. People might find it hurtful or offensive, but it's not actually creating harm in the way that is implied by this legislation.
It's the reverse of sticks and stones, eh?
Yes, it's words of violence. But of course, there's a new penalty created as a result of this act, stirring up hatred. I suppose it's trying to sort of follow in the footsteps of inciting violence, stirring up hatred. I suppose it's quite a malleable phrase, and I suppose this is why it's taken so many years for this bill, as it was passed a couple of years ago, to finally become an act. We've been talking about this information campaign, The Heat Monster, that is this sort of cartoon trying to explain to people what hatred is. We're looking at it right here, a very curious campaign. I just wonder if such a campaign is necessary. Do people really understand what's going on and what the implications of this act could be?
Well, first of all, on the hate monster, it indicates just how patronising the Scottish Government are, because they're talking to their own citizens as though they're children. You know, you be careful of what you say. There's a hate monster on every shoulder. I mean, how old do they think their citizens are? It's ridiculous. That's the first thing. Secondly, on your stirring up point, I think that people are only beginning to grasp the implications of this. But I think that the one of the people that was interviewed very rightly in the news that you just had on, very rightly said this is a snitch's charter. Because stirring up, on the one hand, is something that you'd want. I want politics to be stirred up. I think it's important that we're able to... Stirring up effectively means persuading people. It means creating a response in someone. And, for example, I might want to stir up hatred against Islamism. But you can imagine that if I was to do that, that somebody could say, a third party could then say, she's stirring up hatred, and that could be perceived to be against Muslims, which it isn't. And then they could go into one of the numerous places that have been identified where you can go and report anonymously something that someone else said. And there's a joke that one of the places that they've set up as a reporting booth is in a sex shop, so God knows what they've got in mind there. But there's a mushroom farm, various other mad places, but they're encouraging people to spy on each other, to go and report what people are saying in the pub, saying at home over dinner. Emily, you said, you know, maybe you've got an elderly relative who's a bit backward, but let me assure you, you don't have to be backward. You could be saying something completely legitimate in the privacy of your own home that somebody else would perceive as stirring up hatred, and that could get you into trouble with the correct police,
Claire,
and you could be arrested.
Just very quickly, because unfortunately we're running out of time, we could talk about this all day. The president of the Association of Scottish Police, he's come out warning against the practical difficulties of this type of legislation. The waste of police time when they should be going after what some people would call real crimes. The fact that it might be weaponised by fringe activists online, that the Police Scotland have already committed to investigating every single complaint of this type. This is going to be awful for the police too.
It's disastrous for policing by consent. It actually, I heard somebody from the Scottish Government interviewed earlier today who said, oh, well, it will be up to the police to decide whether that's, you know, an offence or not. In other words, completely disowning the legislation, but also giving a huge amount of power to the police to make those subjective decisions as to what's an offence or not. And we've seen the nonsense on the streets of cities where they say, oh, we saw a swastika, we're not sure if that's in the context offensive. That was at the weekend. We don't know what jihad means. So there's going to be two-tier policing, because they'll be making decisions of this order where they'll say, oh, we've decided that's not stirring up offence, this is stirring up offence. And if I could just get one final thing in, don't let's say, why aren't women in this bill? We want women in this bill. I can assure you now, I do not need the protection of this bill. And in fact, I dread the misogyny hate crime bill that the Scottish Government's going to bring. So I want less people in this bill. I don't want to start adding more to them.
I agree with you, Claire.
It's a fair point. It is just a curious omission. If you're going to go through all of that, it seems like there's a relative inconsistency there. Claire Fox, of course, founder of the Academy of Ideas and a member of the House of Lords. Really appreciate your time. Now, we should say we're talking to a member of the SNP who's in favour of this legislation a little bit later in the programme, so we'll get their points of view there as well. But coming up, all-out war between the Reform Party and the Tories. Just how much of a threat could Richard Tice's party be at the election? Discussing that after this.
I'm Nigel Farage, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Dubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
You think this country needs new gas power stations. Apparently, this will all be about trying to get some form of energy security. Rishi Sunak has upset people today with this suggestion, people saying that actually this would do more damage to climate change than it would do good. Where are you on it, Richard?
I'll tell you exactly where. We need a lot more gas power stations and nuclear power stations because quite often the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. Last week, we imported 16% of all our electricity because we haven't got enough capacity in the UK, and we're now totally over-reliant on renewables.
The part of the problem is the lack of storage capacity, which the government has finally got round to addressing. I think this as backup is actually quite a sensible idea. But they are not doing anything, as far as I can tell. At the moment, it will be retrofitted to have storage capability, which seems to be utterly bonkers. I mean, anyone who's got solar panels, you know very well you're storing up energy. So it's about storage as much as production. And they could have gone, 20 years ago, we could have had nuclear power. We could have done more. We haven't looked far enough ahead in the future, and we are in grave danger of making the same mistake. I mean, the other side of this is, what is the difference going to be? Blackouts are, they're irritating and...
Irritating? It'd be disastrous. It would destroy our economy.
Well, they would be now, but, some of us remember 3-day weeks and things like that. And in fact, I grew up thinking that everybody had, at least a couple of days a week when they had to eat off a primer stove and things.
This is, again, I don't want to harp on, but this is one of the problems in the politics in our country, isn't it? So many politicians, they just think in election cycles. Absolutely. They just think, what can I do and say to get my own backside re-elected at the next general election? They're not always looking ahead. Actually, politics aside, what is genuinely the best thing for this country?
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past 12, and I have to say, our inbox is practically bursting with your thoughts and comments on that discussion we were having over the Scottish Hate Crime Act. We'll be getting to your thoughts in just a moment, a little bit later in the show. But now, shocking new analysis reveals that the Conservatives face being reduced to a grand total of just 80 members of Parliament, as a surging Reform UK threatens to cost them dozens of seats in what could be their worst election defeat in the party's history. And let's not forget, this is the oldest political party in the Western world.
Yes, but this comes as the war of words, let's say, between the two parties is very much heating up. You've got the Tory chairman, Richard Holden, calling the Reform leader, Richard Tice, a threatening bully, and there's lots more of that.
But just how much of a threat could Reform prove to be to the Tories at an election? Let's speak to an expert on the matter. Martin Baxter is the founder of political consultancy Electoral Calculus. So, Martin, let's do the calculation. Just how many seats could Reform cost the Tories? Or, frankly, might they not if people voting Reform wouldn't vote for the Tories? Were Reform not an option? Where does the balance fall?
So, I mean, the thing to notice is that the Conservatives have lost voters in all directions since Boris Johnson's victory in 2019. A lot of Conservative voters have decided to stay at home and not vote, and a lot have decided to go to Reform, more even than have decided to switch to Labour. So the Conservatives are losing voters in all directions, but they're losing a lot to people staying at home and people going to Reform. And it has the air very much of a protest vote, in a similar way, perhaps, that in 2019, many traditional Labour voters either stayed at home or didn't vote Labour because they did not like Jeremy Corbyn. Rishi Sunak, I'm afraid, is repelling voters in all directions, or the Conservatives are generally. I wouldn't say it's particularly his fault. But Reform are now actually in third place in the opinion polls. They're ahead of the Liberal Democrats. But they're not likely to win very many seats themselves. They're not likely to win any at the moment. But they are likely to take, as you say, dozens of seats away from the Conservatives, perhaps 50, maybe even more. If all Reform voters went back to 2019 voting patterns, it could even be 100 seats. But it is a big change to the electoral landscape, with the Conservatives now predicted in now more than at least a couple of recent MRP polls to get less than 100 seats. That's a number that we have, and other pollsters are seeing similar numbers at the moment. So it is a potential political earthquake that is on its way, as all these disenchanted Conservatives are choosing not to vote for the Conservatives, as the polls tell us at the moment.
And this may well be why this war of words is very much heating up at the moment. This may become more and more and more hot. But Lee Anderson, for example, Lee Anderson is now a Reform Party MP. He took a journey from Labour to the Conservatives, then to the Reform Party. How many people out in the country have followed that same journey, or seem like they may well be on that same journey? I think there's quite a large section of society.
I don't have a number for the triple jump. That's an interesting one. But I do have a number I was just working out this morning. For every 100 voters of supporters of all parties in 2019, 8 are actually Conservative voters who've moved to Reform. So that's 8% of the entire population is a Conservative to Reform switcher. And no doubt many of those are like Lee Anderson and perhaps started off with Labour and came to the Conservatives under Boris Johnson to get Brexit done. So, I mean, I say that's probably the protest vote, people who are worried that the Conservatives under Rishi Sunak are Conservatives in name only, and they're not giving them the sort of policies that they're looking for. And so it looks like, frankly, they are possibly cross enough that they are not thinking through how the first past the post electoral system works, because what they are doing by supporting Reform ultimately is taking seats away from the Conservatives and giving them to the Lib Dems and to Keir Starmer's Labour Party. The Conservatives will be making that point, I think, between now and polling day, desperately trying to encourage people to think about the tactical situation and suggest that the Conservatives
it's fascinating how this
than the other two.
Fascinating how it's all stepping up. Suddenly we're seeing a lot more detail about some of these Reform Party candidates. We'll get to that a little bit later. But also it does seem that amongst some polls, amongst men and amongst working class voters, those are the C2DE, to get technical, of the demographic breakdown, amongst those two groups, in some polls, Reform is now ahead of the Conservative Party.
Well,
so
thank you very much, Martin. Really appreciate your time. Your line was a little bit dodgy there, but it was great to get your analysis. Martin Baxter, the founder of political consultancy Electoral Calculus. Yes, the Reform Party are very much going to be under more and more scrutiny as that election approaches, and they're putting a lot of pressure on the Conservative Party. I don't think the Conservatives were expecting them to be polling in the 15%, 16%, 14%, much higher, I imagine, than they were expecting.
Yes, although, as we were just discussing, whether that will turn... I mean, polling third place nationally, huge. I mean, that's more people voting for reform or saying they will than the Lib Dems or the SNP or the Greens or any other minor party. But currently that doesn't translate into a single seat because it's geographically spread out. It's not concentrated in small areas.
It's not great look, is it, though, all this fighting on social media between the leaders and the party chairmen and the MPs.
Lacking in a bit of decorum.
A little bit, yes, we need a bit more decorum, perhaps. Or do you like a scrap? Like a little political scrap.
Well,
anyway, personal cannabis. Speaking of a scrap, personal cannabis use is officially legal for adults in Germany. Will this blaze the way for new drug laws in the UK? See what we did there? We'll get to that after your headlines.
Tom, Emily, thanks very much. 12:31, the headlines this half hour. Scotland's Minister for Communities has suggested that some people could be investigated for misgendering someone online under a new hate crime law, which is now in force. That legislation makes it a crime to stir up hatred against people with protected characteristics, including disability, age, sexual orientation, or people who are transgender. But some police forces have raised concerns that the law could be weaponised by fringe activists to target political opponents. New estimates suggest more than 250 patients may have died needlessly every week in 2023. That's due to long waits in England's hospitals. A report by the Royal College of Emergency Medicines revealed more than 1.5 million patients waited in A&E departments for longer than 12 hours last year. It found the risk of death started to increase after a 5-hour wait and became worse with longer delays. The Department for Health, though, says it has added thousands of hospital beds and insists it is making progress on waiting times. Labour has criticised the government's free childcare policy in England, claiming that ministers have made a pledge without a plan. From today, eligible parents and carers of 2-year-olds will be entitled to 15 hours a week of free childcare. But some nurseries say that the funding is not enough to meet the demand on their waiting lists or to cover their increasing staff costs. And energy bills are due to fall to their lowest rate in 2 years after the regulator Ofgem cut its price cap by 12.3%. It means the average household bill for gas and electricity will fall by around £238 over the course of a year, or around £20 a month. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Gary King. The M25 anti-clockwise queues for now 2 miles following an earlier breakdown around junction 14 at Heathrow. Delays go back towards junction 15 at the M4. Staffordshire, the southbound M42 currently closed. Long delays due to accident investigation work between junction 10 at Tamworth and 9 at Coleshill. In West Yorkshire, the westbound M62, there's a lane closed and delays after an accident between junction 22 at Rishworth Moor and 21 at Milne Road. And the A1M southbound in West Yorkshire, there's a lane closed after an accident between junction 45 at Boston Spa and junction 44 at York. On the trains, Great Western Railway and Transport for Wales services are suspended between Cardiff Central and Carmarthen due to electrical supply problems. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Has the NHS killed your relative and then lied to you about it? There is an alleged cover-up culture in the NHS. They lie to you about why your loved one died, about poor care, then bury documents with evidence in them, and they try to silence staff who speak out. This is according to the NHS Ombudsman. There are around 11,000 avoidable deaths every year. 11,000. Someone's mum dies, their children know something dodgy happened, and then they're met with a rotten culture, including the altering of care plans, the disappearance of crucial documents, and complete denials. They lie to you, but they really get away with it because the NHS is like a religion, and people dare not criticise it. You'd be accused of NHSophobia. The annual budget is around £180 billion, and we now have about 2 million people working for the NHS. They cannot keep blaming everything on being underfunded and understaffed. If they're covering up medical negligence, it means the problem doesn't get dealt with and it keeps happening. And that is the fault of the NHS managers, the people who run it. They've got the money for 837 non-clinical staff working at English hospitals on the highest paid Band 9 contracts, which is between £99,000 and £115,000 a year. How many nurses would that pay for? How many junior doctors? And they've got the time on their hands to think about making the NHS the world's first carbon-neutral health service. They've got time to consider whether women in labour should be picked up by an electric ambulance that might have to be recharged en route to the hospital. There are NHS managers with a budget of £180 billion, 2 million members of staff, and they're crying about being understaffed and under-resourced. If they spent more time looking after patients instead of finding ways to cover up avoidable deaths, then maybe we'd have a better health service.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 36 minutes past 12, and you have been getting in touch. And I did say that we'd come to these because, my goodness, we've had a lot.
Yes, lots of people are concerned about this legislation, it would seem. Darryl says, all this and more going on that needs immediate action, and we see where government priorities lie. More legislation to prosecute people who are upset woke snowflakes, Darryl says, by daring to have an opinion and airing it. What has happened to our country, he asks.
And Joan says, I am Scottish and I think this bill should be stopped by Westminster. They need to step in. But I'm afraid, Joan, it's a little bit too late for that. This bill is now an act. And you might have heard of the Section 35 orders. That's what happens when Westminster stops a piece of legislation because they think it can counteract with union policy in other ways. It happened, actually, over the gender recognition bill in Scotland. That's the only time it was used. But that can only be used before a piece of legislation gets royal assent, before the King signs it off. And sadly, sadly, by your standards, probably, by other people's standards, they might be delighted. But this is now an act that has achieved royal assent.
Too late. Joan, this is Scotland, 2024. Nick says these new Scottish hate laws are deeply flawed. Prosecution does not depend on fact, but on someone's opinion. As with most things, everyone has a different perspective on the issues. Whose opinion is correct? Yes, do you really want your local police officer deciding... It's just ridiculous.
And actually, in Scotland, it won't be your local police officer because, of course, all of the local police forces got centralised by the SNP government. So there's only one Police Scotland. So it'll be a central police officer.
I think we will see two-tier policing with this legislation. It's totally unworkable, in my view, and this isn't just us saying it. It's experts saying it.
Although we will
the president of the Association for Police Scotland
in favour of this legislation as well to get the view as to why this is also very necessary. But Richard says, here's a hate crime for you. I dislike the SNP and I don't live in Scotland. Feel free to let them know. Well, Richard, I'm afraid that probably breaches the Act because it protects religion. And, of course, people who adhere to the SNP sometimes do behave a little bit like...
I shouldn't laugh. This is chilling. Andy, to finish, he says, so, Humza Useless, yes, play on his words, has officially made it a crime to offend someone or perceived to offend someone. The official end of free speech, Andy says.
Yeah,
well, there you go. Keep your views coming in.
Lots and lots of views on that issue.
If you do approve of this legislation, please do get in touch as well.
Yeah.
If any of you are out there.
Maybe we shouldn't have as unfettered free speech as we have previously enjoyed in this country. But on another issue of perhaps even free speech, perhaps this ties in and perhaps it does show that there are boundaries sometimes in these areas. Are swastikas ever acceptable?
It's not a question you probably ever thought you would have to ask.
No.
But a Met police officer policing a pro-Palestine protest over the weekend was filmed telling a Jewish woman that using the symbol could be acceptable when taken into context. So let's have a listen.
You'd like to walk with me because I can point these people out to you. And again, I was told when I asked that a swastika was not necessarily anti-Semitic or disruptive to public order. That doesn't seem right to me.
Everything needs to be taken within context, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's a context of hate. Why does the swastika need context?
What exactly are you confused about?
What I'm confused is how you don't. In what context a swastika is not anti-Semitic? This is what I want to know. Because again,
I suppose to some, I don't know how. everybody would feel about that site. Guys, that has happened. I'm here working to the bronze commander, and it is not my responsibility, unfortunately, my role, to walk down the road.
Fairly extraordinary conversations. Now, we haven't seen the full context of that conversation, and, of course, context is everything. It doesn't look good.
No.
Now, joining us is the Director of Investigations and Enforcement at the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, Stephen Silverman. Stephen, how concerned are you when you sort of hear those conversations that images of swastikas on these marches must be taken in context?
Good afternoon, Tom, Emily. This raises two extraordinarily concerning issues. The first is that if we have police officers on our streets who are unable to say unequivocally that the symbol that is synonymous with the attempt to exterminate the entire European Jewish population by the Nazis, if they cannot say that is unequivocally anti-Semitic, we are in very, very serious trouble. The second issue that it raises is that we now have policing by context. We appear to have abandoned on-the-spot policing. We were told that a genocidal chant that we have been gaslit about time and time again, we have been told that that chant, in some contexts, is acceptable. We have been told that there is a context in which calling for violent jihad on the streets of our capital is acceptable. It depends on the context. And now we have been told that the symbol that is associated with the discrimination, the murder, the herding onto trains, and the gassing of millions of Jews is possibly not anti-Semitic, depending on context. How on earth have we arrived here?
Well, Stephen, watching that clip, it seems to me that this police officer is just completely out of his depth. He's been caught up in this conversation while he seems to be having a coffee break. If I'm very generous to the police officer, of course, we don't have the full-length video here. It's a short clip of this exchange. Completely out of his depth, perhaps a little lazy, and not sure what the law is. That's what it seems to me.
I mean, I think you're right. He does appear to be out of his depth. But I would say to that if there is one thing that people in this country understand, it's the swastika.
Yeah.
There are, heaven knows how many hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of children and grandchildren of British soldiers who died fighting that symbol. And for an officer of the Metropolitan Police not to be able to stand there and call out the swastika for what it is completely unacceptable. Now, we don't know if this is ignorance or if he's been put between a rock and a hard place because of the policing by contact strategy that has been set out by the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Mark Rowley. Either way, we're heading down a very, very dangerous path.
I think everyone can accept that seeing a swastika on one of these marches is chilling. And frankly, the worst possible taste. I have seen some of these signs that use swastikas almost to compare what the Jewish state is doing now to the actions of the Nazis in the 1930s and 1940s. Not so much to say that the Jews should be exterminated, but to say that Israel is acting like the Nazis. Now, again, that is an anti-Semitic trope. It's wrong. But I wonder, where does the bound of free speech, where does the boundary of free speech sit here? Should people be allowed to really expose their movement for ignorance and poor taste under the law, or should they not? Is this a free speech issue?
Oh, well, look, I mean, free speech has never been an unqualified right. Yes, everyone has freedom of expression, but as soon as that begins to impinge on other people's rights, it becomes a problem. And when it is used in order to carry out expressions of hatred of the Jewish people, I'm afraid, you know, the rights of any minority that is being discriminated against and openly hated, they trump that right. And, you know, I understand that, you know, that is different in places like the United States, but here, that is the situation.
Yeah, well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Stephen Silverman from the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, great to speak to you. I do think we just have a lot of police officers as well who are totally out of their depth. They're being asked to police protests that are highly political about foreign conflict, and I'm sure there are police officers there who simply are ignorant and don't know
I think
what to clamp down on and what not to.
What Stephen was saying there about the laws that we have, it does seem that they're applied for some people and not applied for others. And it might be easier if we had sort of an American-style First Amendment where, you know, just anything goes, or we had precisely the same sort of application for laws that we do have.
Have you seen
we're
some
in this
of the
halfway house.
Have you seen some of the pro-Palestine protests in New York? Wow.
No, they're
now those would be shut down, some of those banners. Anyway, a Scotland Yard spokesman has said this clip is a short excerpt of what was a 10-minute conversation with an officer. During the full conversation, the officer establishes that the person was concerned about had already been arrested for a public order offence in relation to a placard. The officer then offered to arrange for other officers to attend and accompany the woman to identify any other persons she was concerned about amongst the protesters, but after turning to speak to his supervisor, she had unfortunately left. Interesting.
Well, coming up, a certain London council could be raking in a whopping £1 million a month from low-traffic neighbourhood enforcements. But is this fair on motorists? We'll get to that after this.
Shocking.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather. Well, through the rest of the day, it's a mixed picture. Sunshine and showers, particularly in the south, some of these heavy, further pulses of rain further north. And it's all thanks to low pressure, which continues to dominate the weather pattern through the week ahead, bringing in various systems off the Atlantic, some wet and windy weather at times. For the rest of the day, this band of cloud and rain affecting parts of Northern Ireland, North Wales into Northern England, southern Scotland will remain here for much of the day. Quite cool under this. Bright skies to the north of this, some sunny spells across the Northwest Highlands, sunshine and heavy showers across the rest of England and Wales. Temperatures here in the best of the sunshine up to around 15 or 16 Celsius. Showers rumble on through into the evening time, but they do start to fade away into the early hours. This band of rain continues to affect parts of Scotland, particularly in the east, and then further showers pushing their way eastwards through the English Channel. Some of these could be heavy at times. Under clearer spells, temperatures dipping to low single figures in the countryside, but for most it will be quite a cloudy start to Tuesday. Best of the brightness across this central swathe of the UK, some mist and fog patches soon clearing away. And then through Tuesday itself, it remains quite cloudy and damp across northern and eastern parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, some bright spells, some scattered showers, and then later on in the day, some cloud and rain pushing into the southwest. Temperatures up again to the mid-teens, a little cooler in the north.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 12:49. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, low traffic neighbourhoods in London are still having a major impact on motorists. Previously, unseen figures show Hammersmith and Fulham Council issued more than 340,000 340,000 penalty charge notices in less than a year. That's raked in £1 million a month from motorists. Now, this is a London council, but similar things are happening across the country.
Well, let's get the thoughts now of motoring journalist Quentin Wilson on this. Quentin, I suppose, on the one hand, these are changing the road layouts for people. These are making journeys longer, more tricky to navigate, and people are clearly being tripped up by it. On the other hand, when these are implemented, local residents tend to quite like them.
So what worries me about LTNs, and look, the ambition for cleaner air in our towns and cities is great, and I completely applaud that, as you know. But it's being sort of, the councils are kind of weaponising it and monetising it, and this isn't right. And we need to take the public with us on this and make environmentalism and cleaner air in our towns and cities a good thing. But like ULEZ and like Uxbridge, it's become weaponised, it's become anathema to people who drive cars. So this has been badly handled. And when I see people who are running these schemes, there was one London borough where the person who's responsible for this has a degree in sports education. I want science applied to this. We also know that there's an investigation into the people that are kind of giving us the evidence that these things work, and they are connected to contracts within those LTN schemes. And Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, quite rightly said we need to look at this very carefully. So this gets clean air in our cities a bad rap, and that, I think, is the biggest tragedy of all.
It's interesting you highlight that there may well be vested interests. I know there are lots of cycling activists within local councils in London and elsewhere, but this is just a cash cow, isn't it? I mean, £1 million in fines from low traffic neighbourhoods. And Tom says, oh, the residents like it. Yes, the residents who are now living on a very quiet road with no motorists are going to love it, but everyone else who has to travel through the area, who doesn't necessarily live on that nice quiet road now, they're not going to like it, are they? It's an absolute nightmare for people.
This figure is really scandalous, and I think we need to look at it very, very hard, because it's doing nobody any service at all apart from council coffers. And as soon as people see that this is naked profiteering, then they are going to lose faith in all this. And let's have transparency. Let's find out where that money goes, and let's reduce the cost for people. And look here, Emily, I think we call them not motorists, because this makes them sound like a privileged group. We call them drivers, because there are 40 million of them, and that's 2/3 of the electorate. That's a distinction I think it's really, really important to make. So this, like ULEZ, is really doing clean air and environmentalism a bad service. And we need to look at this and study it. Does it work? Does it bring the benefits claimed? And again, like the research coming out of TfL about ULEZ, you know, it can't be peer reviewed. It isn't peer reviewed at the moment.
Quentin, isn't this just an adjustment cost? People will obviously be tripped up as the road layout has changed, but it will just take time. People will get used to the new road layout, and frankly, there'll be streets where kids can run around and play as they used to do before the motor car sort of came through every city in the land.
Hang on, they've had to axe one already in Hackney or somewhere like that because it was causing so many problems. Isn't that right, Quentin?
Campaigns.
Isn't that right, Quentin?
But 2 hour delay to the bus route. But we need to look at this in a scientific way. And look, I take the point that there are some areas where it has benefited and residents love it, and that's great. But we need to include everybody in this clean air debate, not just the people who live in the leafy suburbs of Hammersmith. It's the people on the main roads as well. The big question, do LTNs work? And if they do, how we can implement them without this divisive, apparently money-making scheme behind it. And that's a really important message we've got to get across to consumers.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Quentin Wilson, who is, of course, a motoring journalist. I mean, you're going to need a lot of money for cycle lanes, aren't you? That one in Bradford we were talking about a few weeks ago. How much was it?
Expensive. Millions and millions and
millions for like a mile and a bit. Anyway, coming up, protests erupt in Edinburgh. They are due to. This is all over Scotland's new hate crime law. We'll be speaking to a proponent who supports the bill, says it will protect citizens. It's Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather.
on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather. It's a mixed picture out there, and over the next few days it remains very similar, unsettled, further spells of rain, but there will be some warm sunshine at times. Looking at the pressure pattern, low pressure systems moving in from the Atlantic, bringing spells of rain, some stronger winds, particularly later on in the week. But there will be some sunny spells in between, which is what we've seen across parts of England and Wales today. These showers should slowly fade away. However, we will see further spells of rain across parts of Scotland into northern England, particularly in the east, some of this heavy at times. In between, there will be some clear spells, and this will allow temperatures to dip down into low single figures. So perhaps a touch of light frost in the countryside for one or two of us, but for most, it's a cloudy start to Tuesday. Further showers in places. This rain across eastern Scotland remains here for much of the day. A little brighter across the far north. Some sunny spells developing across much of the UK as we move through into the afternoon, but a scattering of showers. Towards the southwest, this band of cloud and rain will push in, and temperatures overall reaching the mid-teens in the south, still chilly across Scotland, 7 or 8 degrees. Taking a look at Wednesday, the next area of low pressure moves in, showery outbreaks of rain pushing north and eastwards across the country. Some of this heavy at times, blustery around the coasts, followed by sunshine and showers, and it remains unsettled through the rest of the week. Further rain at times, but in any sunshine, temperatures lifting.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could win our biggest prize giveaway so far. First, there's an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. Plus, courtesy of Variety Cruises, a bespoke 7-night small boat cruise for two worth £10,000. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, your next holiday could be on us. Choose any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and find your home at sea. We'll also send you packing with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Monday, the 1st of April.
Protests in Edinburgh are due to start in the next half an hour as Scotland's new hate crime law comes into force today, April Fool's Day. It comes as some warn the new legislation could be weaponised by fringe activists and have a chilling effect on free speech.
And Germany, they're legalising the recreational use of cannabis today. So we're asking, should the UK follow suit? We'll be debating that very soon.
And the search continues for a disabled boy's stolen specialised van. The specially modified vehicle, which was taken on Tuesday, is essential for the care of the 13-year-old. We'll be joined by his mother. Cannabis. Should we legalise it? That's the debate we'll be hosting in around 20 minutes' time. Why? Because today, that's what Germany's done.
Yes, a controversial move. I think the strongest argument to follow Germany in the UK is that it seems to be already decriminalised. I mean...
So you might as well tax it.
Walking around some parts of the country, particularly urban areas, it's all you can smell. It's all you can smell. Some bloke was cycling down my road the other day with a massive, stinking of the stuff.
For me, the strongest argument to legalise it is it would annoy a lot of people who currently... No, sorry. Let me get this right. It would delight people... OK, currently there's a group of people in the country who say you should never break international law. And they get very angry when people sort of say, oh, this might be breaching international law. Well, there is an international law forbidding the legalisation of drugs like cannabis. It was the treaty signed in 1961 by just about every country, the single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. Now, the same people that sort of boo and hiss about Rwanda necessarily perhaps breaking international law are cheering Germany for breaking international law on this. I think it's a remarkable inconsistency, and I think that's quite fun.
Who would have thought? I'm not sure about this. I don't think it's probably the right move here.
No?
But I'm open to arguments. I'm open to it. Lots of people say, it would bring in lots of tax money.
Whenever this comes up on GB News, I'm actually surprised by the quality and diversity of views in the inbox. Lots of strong opinions on either side of the debate here. GBviews at gbnews.com. We'll be getting to those and that debate after your headlines with Sam.
Tom, Emily, thanks very much and a very good afternoon from the newsroom. It's just gone 1 o'clock. Leading the news today, new laws in Scotland to tackle hate crime have come into effect, which campaigners say could threaten free speech. Those laws bring together existing legislation, making it a crime to stir up hatred against people with protected characteristics. That includes disability, age, sexual orientation, or people who are transgender. But some police forces are concerned that dealing with complaints could become a distraction for officers. The Scottish Conservatives say resources should be directed towards frontline policing. Well, we asked people on the streets of Edinburgh what they think about those new laws.
You're going to be going out and you're encouraging snitches and people to go and speak up about people just having a private conversation. The key's in the word private.
The police themselves have said that they are only going to respond where complaints have been raised, and our concern would be that there are campaign groups out there that would be looking to raise complaints in order to silence people that they don't like.
And that interpretation of the hate crime speech now could be used very much against us, and it's a recipe for disaster.
The head of the Nurses Union has accused the government of, she says, packing hospital corridors with patients, and that the quality of care is not only undignified but fatally unsafe. It comes as new estimates have suggested more than 250 patients a week in England may have died needlessly last year because of long waits for a hospital bed. A report by the Royal College of Emergency Medicine has revealed more than 1.5 million patients waited in emergency departments for longer than 12 hours last year. The Department for Health, though, says it has added thousands of hospital beds and insists it is making progress on waiting times. More than 5,400 migrants have been intercepted illegally crossing the English Channel in small boats during the first 3 months of this year. That's a record figure for that quarter, up 43% compared to the same time last year. Official figures from the Home Office show that 442 people made the crossing in 9 small boats just yesterday. That's despite difficult weather conditions, with lifeboats scrambling to assist some of those arriving. Today's strong winds, though, have now made that journey completely impassable. Plans to fine rough sleepers are provoking outrage, with more than 40 Conservative MPs said to be preparing to rebel. The new criminal justice bill would allow police to fine or to move on so-called nuisance rough sleepers. It was intended to replace the Vagrancy Act from 1824, which currently criminalises both rough sleeping and begging. The report suggests the new bill has been paused while ministers negotiate with MPs who are concerned about the consequences of issuing fines to homeless people. The plans were introduced originally by the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who branded rough sleeping as a lifestyle choice. Some households will feel the effects of a cash boost from today as new economic policies come into effect. The national living wage is increasing to £11.44, giving a pay rise to around 3 million of Britain's lowest paid workers. Small businesses will also benefit from a raised VAT threshold and fully funded apprenticeships for young people. Business Minister Kevin Hollinrake told GB News this morning that economic conditions are improving.
We understand it's been difficult, but things are improving. We'll see the economy turning a corner this year. We'll see interest rates dropping, taxes dropping, of course. £900 a year for the average person in terms of tax reductions with the national insurance cuts. So all those things are all good news for people. Of course, there's more to do, but things really are turning a corner.
And energy bills are due to fall to their lowest rate in 2 years after the regulator Ofgem cut its price cap by 12.3%. It means the average household bill for gas and electricity will fall by around £238 over the course of a year. That's about £20 a month. However, around 10 million households are also being urged to submit meter readings to avoid possible overpayments. And finally, before we head back to Tom and Emily, a pink dress once worn by Marilyn Monroe has sold for a record-setting price. The long-sleeved silk jersey frock was owned and worn by the world's most famous film star, and it sold for just under £300,000 by auction house Julian's in Los Angeles. There was also a smoking jacket and slippers worn by Playboy founder Hugh Hefner, which went under the hammer for more than £10,000. And for the person who truly has everything, there was a chance to pick up a crypt near both of those iconic stars. The price, well, it was just under £155,000. That's the latest from the newsroom. You can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now, though, it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 1:08. Now, controversial new hate crime laws have come into force in Scotland today. The aim is to tackle the harm caused by hatred and prejudice towards characteristics such as age, disability, religion, sexual orientation, transgender identity and...
being intersex.
And not... females?
No, not females. That was the whole list. Age, disability, religion, sexual orientation, transgender identity, being intersex. That's it. So lots of protected characteristics, but not including women.
Well, not that I think that women need more protection in this way, but it's worth noting. But yes, opponents, including public figures such as J.K. Rowling, Elon Musk, have been very vocal in their criticism of the law, saying that they could be used to stifle free speech and weaponised to settle scores, particularly online.
But shall we get some of the details now? Joining us is former SNP councillor Austin Sheridan. Austin, now, why did the Scottish Government bring forward this bill? Is there a particular problem with hateful conduct in Scotland?
I don't think there's just a particular problem with hateful conduct in Scotland. I think there's a particular problem with it across other parts of the United Kingdom and indeed across the world. If you look at a very recent example, if you look at the conflict that's happening in the Middle East, and then we look at people for example, Jewish people, Muslim people being targeted and so on, that we can see there is a rise in hatred and people are feeling, unsafe at particular times. And I think it's important that our legislators respond to that and create laws in order to protect everybody in our society. I think the problem that we've had with this is that there's been a lot of misconceptions about what the bill means, and people have a right to question legislation and have the freedom of speech to do so. But there's a difference between freedom of speech and having this perceived freedom to spread hatred, which obviously shouldn't be the case.
But Austin, why aren't the SNP listening to the likes of the president of the Association of Police Scotland? I mean, he's warned that the police will be caught in the middle. They'll those lodging complaints. If the police conclude the legal threshold for a prosecution isn't high enough, then those people will go after the police and complain. They're saying that they won't have the time or the resources to chase after every complaint that they will have to, by law, look into. They're talking about how this will be used online to score points. It'll be weaponised by some fringe activists. I mean, there are a lot of practical issues towards this, and then lawyers coming out and saying that essentially this means Scotland might have to police the world, because if something's read in Scotland, it is considered published in Scotland. I mean, there are so many issues with this legislation in terms of the practicality.
Well, of course, there could always be people that could try and abuse any legislation, that's in place, whether it's new legislation or existing legislation. However, the police, are well trained and well equipped, and I've got faith, in our policing and justice system, that they'll be able, to carry this out efficiently. But we also have to remember that this bill has been passed with cross-party support. The only party that hasn't supported this is the Scottish Conservatives. So the SNP, the Labour Party, the Green Party, and the Liberal Democrats have all backed this legislation in Scotland's Parliament. This has been in the making for 3 years, so it's not the case of that anything's been rushed through our Parliament. This has been something that has been carefully considered.
Austin, you're right to bring up that many different parties backed this, and people, perhaps in other parts of the United Kingdom, might look to some of those parties and think, is a similar version of this legislation coming to other constituent countries of the UK? But just finally, is it not the case that under the terms of this Act, as it is now an Act of the Scottish Parliament, if I hear something that I think is offensive towards me, I will be able to say the police have to investigate this, whether or not any reasonable or objective person would think that it was a hateful thing. Everything now has to be investigated by the police.
No, any complaint to the police would look into it. You can't make a complaint to the police and they're going to say, oh no, we're not going to ask any questions regarding it. It depends on the nature of what's been said. But absolutely, if there's something that has been said, that is deemed to be offensive, then of course, if you make a complaint to the police, then the police will take the reasonable measures to ensure that the law hasn't been broken. It's a bit like, for example, if you witness somebody being assaulted in the street, the person that's been assaulted may not report that crime, but if you witness that and you then contacted the police to report that you've witnessed that.
I'm sorry, Austin, but offence is the offence is. Austin, offence has got to be the price we pay for freedom. I mean, this is ludicrous. But thank you very much for putting up a strong defence of this legislation. Austin Sheridan, former SNP councillor. It's not up to the government to make sure no one's offended. It's crazy.
And yet, Emily, here's perhaps a parallel situation, because this is an edge case when it comes to free speech, something that happened in London over the weekend. Are swastikas ever acceptable? A Metropolitan Police officer policing a pro-Palestine protest over the weekend was filmed telling a Jewish woman that using the symbol, the swastika, could be acceptable when taken into context. Let's take a listen.
You to walk with me because I can point these people out to you. And again, I was told when I asked that a swastika was not necessarily anti-Semitic or disruptive to public order. That doesn't seem right to me.
Everything needs to be taken in context, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's a context of why does the swastika need context?
What exactly are you confused about?
What I'm confused is how you don't. In what context a swastika is not anti-Semitic? This is what I want to know. Because again,
I suppose to some, I don't know how. everybody would feel about that site. That has happened. I'm here working to the Bronze Commander, and it is not my responsibility, unfortunately, my role, to walk down the road.
Yeah, concerning footage there, although we must say this is just a short clip of what the police have gone on to say was a 10-minute conversation. But let's get some details now on what the police should be doing or should not be doing, how they should be interacting with people on protests like this. Joining us is the former Met Police Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chowdhury. Thank you so much for making the time for us this afternoon. Do you think that the police officer in this case, in this video, was acting inappropriately?
Actually, I give credit to the police officer in that particular situation. I think, in fairness to him, he was given a briefing in terms of where he could and where he couldn't be posted, so he was trying to comply with that. If he'd have left that location, then he would have placed other officers or the public at risk if there had been some form of a situation. However, he did try very hard to establish exactly what the situation was. Credit where credit is due. He didn't actually understand the detail on swastikas and so on, and he did actually explain that to her and said that he wasn't an expert in that matter. He also tried to explain the legislation to her, and as I understand it, it was, in fact, a 10-minute clip, and he did actually establish for that woman that the person concerned had been arrested, in fact, with a placard. Whether it was that placard or not, I don't know. But the other thing I'd say about police officers when they're at these protest sites is they're not actually experts in, speaking to the public in that respect when it comes to almost like a media-type interview. They're not spokespersons for the Met. I think perhaps he could have done a couple of things differently, and that is perhaps call up his supervisors to say, look, we've got this situation here. Can you please advise? Have I got this wrong? I'm trying to comply with the legislation. But actually, he wasn't even a witness to what the woman was talking about. So she was just merely asking him a question that she was frustrated about.
Now, it does look from the clip that he is, well, either completely unaware and out of his depth at what the swastika represents, particularly in this context. We talk about policing in context or by context. Clearly, when it's a Israel versus Palestine protest, if we can reduce it to that, of course, it's far more complex, but he seems totally out of his depth. Are the police being asked to do too much, or are the police just simply not being trained enough to manage these type of protests that are deeply controversial?
I think the police are getting better at it, but I think one of the issues here is that there is a lack of training for officers. Majority of these officers come from frontline, whether it's borough training, whether they're neighbourhood officers, whether they're recruits. Some of these officers are newly trained recruits that are coming out onto these protests that have never necessarily policed those protests. There definitely needs to be some more training around it, but I don't think you're ever going to get a complete package from an officer who understands everything about every type of faith, what can and can't be done. These officers, and just listening to him, he had clear instructions around either the arresting of individuals, what they can, what they can't do. They have to consider the wider implications to them if they are undertake a number of arrests, because then what that does, it actually leaves those protests short of police officers and resources on the front line, on the ground level there.
Well, Shabnam Chowdhury, former Detective Superintendent at the Metropolitan Police, really thank you for your time on this issue. Just looking at that picture there, let's get more on many more stories, of course, including decriminalising cannabis.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Now, the massive debate back across the pond is NATO. Yeah. Everyone's talking NATO every day. It was your comments about them not paying enough, not paying 2%. And you said this, you said it again recently. You made a comment, well, the Russians can do whatever they want if these guys don't pay. Well, that's now being used.
Well, they can use it. I don't really care if they use it, because what I'm saying is that's a form of negotiation. Why should we guard these countries that have a lot of money? And the United States was paying for most of NATO. And when I went there, and I already had it out with them, and now they stopped paying again. But now they're paying because of those comments that you saw 2-3 weeks ago. The question was asked by the head of a major country in front of everyone else, 28 countries at the time, including us. They said, so if we don't pay our bills, are you going to protect us from Russia? I said, you mean you're delinquent? You're not paying the bills? Yes. Nope, I'm not going to pay you. We're not going to do it. We're not going to defend you. If you're not paying your bills, we're not going to defend you. It's very simple. And hundreds of billions of dollars came flowing in. Now, if I say, yes, I am, they're not going to pay their bills. Why would they do that? NATO has to treat the U.S. fairly, because if it's not for the United States, NATO literally doesn't even exist. But they took advantage of us, like most countries do.
If they start to pay their bills properly and the club is fair, are places like Poland defended? Will America be there?
I believe the United States was paying 90% of NATO, the cost of NATO. It could be 100%. It was the most unfair thing. And don't forget, it's more important to them than it is to us. We have an ocean in between some problems. It's more important for them. They were taking advantage, and they did. They took advantage of us on trade, and they took advantage on
So if they play fair, if they start to play fair, America's there?
Yes, 100%, 100%.
Thank you.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 21 minutes past 1, and we're looking now at a picture of some cannabis.
Yeah.
Why? Well, smoking cannabis is now legal for over 18s in Germany as of today. That's as new laws around personal possession of the substance come into effect.
Well, adults can now officially carry up to 25 grams of dried marijuana, and they can grow up to 3 plants at home.
Which I suppose is encouraging horticultural skills, if nothing else. But the pros and cons of decriminalising drugs is an age-old conversation. Many arguments for and against. We're going to be debating this topic in just a few moments' time. Should the United Kingdom follow Germany's lead?
Now, I would instinctively say absolutely not. There's enough cannabis about as it is. You can barely walk down a street these days without smelling it, and it is the most awful
Emily,
smell for those of us who don't indulge.
Isn't that a wonderful point to show that prohibition has failed in the United Kingdom? So you might as well legalise it.
For making personal... I guess the problem is that there will always be stronger marijuana, always be stronger, perhaps more dangerous products, marijuana products, that will be on the black market. So I'm not sure if it will end criminality.
But Emily, Ian has written in to say cannabis should be legalised. It's no worse than alcohol. We should be making cash by taxing it.
Well, Lorraine says absolutely not. I went to New York where it's legal and the whole place just stank of it. Yes, I've heard this too. Every street I walk down, you are hit with the vile smell of it. It can make some of us feel a little nauseous, actually.
Yes, and Paul agrees, says when my window's open. Well, Paul, your neighbour seems to be doing something illegal there.
Yes, actually, yes.
For the moment.
Would that be a... oh, gosh, there's that bill that went through about how if you're a disruptive neighbour...
Oh, yes, yes.
And I think that sort of thing might come under it.
It might, but then again, there could be legal reasons. Of course, medical cannabis is growing and growing, if you'll pardon the pun. And, of course, the United Kingdom is actually a large exporter of legal medical cannabis, along with countries like Canada.
This is what I'm worried about. Phil's saying cannabis taken by young people causes brain and thinking problems and addiction, often used as a gateway drug. I think there is some truth to that, not in all cases, of course, but in some. It very much will be the first drug someone uses, and then they may follow a path to stronger drugs, unfortunately.
Why would they if they didn't get it through an illegal dealer? If they didn't sort of open their world to that criminal underworld, to that black market, if they got it in boots, would they necessarily then go on to other illegal substances? Perhaps not.
Well, let us know what you think about it. It's clear there are very much two sides to this debate, and Germany has taken this bold move. Not the first.
No.
Not the first to.
But maybe not the last. Well, let's debate this now. Joining us is the consultant neurologist and medical cannabis expert, Professor Mike Barnes, who feels the UK should follow Germany and legalise cannabis, and the journalist and author Peter Hitchens, who says that we should certainly not. Peter Hitchens, let's start with you. Why not?
Why not? Well, there are many reasons, but the most obvious one available to us now is the growing correlation between the use of marijuana and mental illness in its users. There is also a correlation observable, and I stress their correlations because that's what they are, but I don't think that many people can really resist the suggestion that they may be connected. The other correlation is between violent crime and the use of marijuana. An increasing number of seriously violent crimes turn out to have been committed by people who have been long-term marijuana users. It's a very serious and growing problem, and one in which the authorities, for one reason or another, are completely uninterested. That's partly because since 1971, they've been engaged in a de facto slow-motion decriminalisation of marijuana in this country. Technically, possession of marijuana in this country carries a 5-year prison sentence and an unlimited fine, which is quite a serious crime on any book. But these laws simply are not enforced. The police have decided not to enforce them, and the courts have decided not to enforce them. And this has been going on now for so long that as I walked to the studio from the Paddington Tube Station, I had to walk through a miasma of marijuana stench, as you do most of the time in London during the summer months anyway. It is effectively a decriminalised drug, and the effects of it are great. The difficulty, as I say, for people like me, is that there is no money at all in opposing this. There's an awful lot of money in the vast billionaire campaigns for legalising marijuana, such as the successful one in California recently, and therefore there's no money in research which might establish a link. But people such as Professor Sir Robin Murray, the leading psychiatrist, will say pretty much that the connection between marijuana use and mental illness is more or less
That's
established.
a very good point, Peter, that there could be a lot of money in legalising it. Professor Mike Barnes, Peter says it's a danger to the individual who's taking the marijuana, but also to the public at large.
Well, you'll not be surprised to know I disagree with that. There's no doubt that cannabis can cause psychosis in vulnerable people, but that risk is very much overplayed. And there's a recent study that showed you've got to stop 10,000 men and 29,000 women from smoking to prevent one episode of psychosis. That puts it into context. I'm not playing down the fact that, yes, high THC street cannabis can cause psychosis. But the point is that there's about 3 million people in this country who use it regularly anyway. Let us legalise it. Let us make it safe for people to use it. We can control the quality, we can control the quantity, and we can make it much safer. I have a caveat about making it legal. I have to say that we do need to get the medical prescription right in the first place. There's a risk that if we decriminalise it or legalise it too soon, and the people who need it for medical use, well, their doctor will tell them to go and get it from the shop down the road, whereas they actually probably need proper medical advice. So I would like to see the medical side of cannabis got right first, which it isn't in this country as yet, and then think about legalising second.
Peter, what do you make of that? Currently, there are 3 million people in the country who use cannabis, and frankly, it would be safer for them if it was strains that we knew, that we could control, that we could tax, that we could regulate.
Well, I don't know where Mike Barnes gets his figure on that, or how on earth one could establish that it was so. But the problems tend to arise among two groups, particularly among the young, because the danger from marijuana to the human brain is at its greatest below the age of 26. And anyone with much knowledge of our school system knows that it circulates freely in our schools from the age of about 11. I know of one particularly tragic case where the person involved began smoking marijuana at the age of 11 and his life was ruined as a result. The real problem then, among others, is in the habitual users. So there may be quite a lot of people who might have tried it once or twice, but the ones who are habitually using it are a much smaller number, and it is among them that you tend to find the problems. I wouldn't preach complacency. Also, there's this fantasy that if you legalise it, it can be regulated. Now, this has been demonstrated to be untrue in all the jurisdictions where it's been legalised, whether it be Uruguay or Canada or California or Colorado. In all those cases, legalisation has taken place, there has been regulation, but the illegal market has continued to flourish alongside because, of course, with regulation comes taxation. And the illegal market, which is as unconstrained by feeble policing as it was before, continues to sell free of tax at much lower prices, and therefore people continue to buy unregulated. The whole fantasy that legalisation will lead to regulation is just that, and people should stop saying it. There's quite enough experience now from places where it has been legalised to show that it is false, and it's just simply morally wrong for people to continue to make this claim.
Well, Mike, if you're still there, Mike, I'd like to put one of those points to you. Are you worried? Well, one of the points that keeps reoccurring from some of our viewers and listeners is the worry that cannabis is a gateway to other harder drugs that can be even more damaging in terms of health. So a lot of young people, they start by smoking marijuana with their friends, and it can escalate to much harder, more dangerous drugs. Is this not giving the green light, saying it's okay for you to take drugs?
No, we're given the green light to say it's okay to take cannabis, not all drugs, and there is no evidence whatsoever, and I know Peter will disagree with this, but there's no evidence whatsoever that cannabis is a gateway drug. It's a gateway drug only in the sense, if you go to your illegal dealer, he or she will try and sell you something else at the same time. Taking cannabis does not lead to the use of harder drugs, necessarily, psychologically or physically. So that is complete fallacy, I'm afraid. So that will not happen.
Is it not addictive, Mike? Mike, is there not an addictive element, even through just the habitual nature of it?
Yes, about 9% is the accepted figure of people who take high THC, at the moment street cannabis, become, not addicted is the wrong word, dependent on it. That does happen, and that will probably continue to happen if it's legalised. There's no doubt about that. It's not something that's entirely safe. No drug, no medicine is entirely safe. So yes, there are issues, but my point is that if you make it legal, you can do your best to control those issues. And I don't know where Peter got his figures from, because there is no evidence that in the States or Uruguay or wherever that regulating it doesn't work. Regulating it does work. You control the level of THC, you control the amount you can carry. Of course, the big criminal gangs that still bypass that's inevitable. But you can control it, you can make it safer, and of course we shouldn't forget the benefit to the economy. About 100,000 jobs and several billion pounds of income, which is not to be sneezed at in these days.
And Peter, what do you make of that point that Mike raised, that the reason this can sometimes be a gateway drug is people get it through illegal means? If you got it through legal means, you wouldn't then be upsold on that chain of other illegal drugs. It will be much safer.
Well, I've dealt with this claim that decriminalising cannabis will stop it being sold illegally, because it simply is not so. I haven't got any figures, because figures for the illegal sale of marijuana are, for some reason, startlingly hard to obtain. But ask the Canadian government whether there is still a large illegal marijuana market in Canada, and it will tell you that there is. And ask anybody in Colorado or California the same thing, and they'll tell you that there is. It isn't really worth arguing about.
Of course, it varies depending on how much you're allowed to buy. Some of the places that have legalised it have only legalised small amounts of possession, others large amounts of possession.
Yes,
so
true.
That would correspond with how large the illegal market is, surely.
Before they decriminalised and legalised, all these jurisdictions were, as we are, completely feeble and defeatist about the possession of the drug. They didn't make any serious effort to deter it for many years beforehand. And so this enormous and highly prosperous and very successful illegal market flourished before legalisation and flourishes afterwards. It's very simple to take on, and people should grasp it. But the point about gateway drugs is rubbish. I've never made it. Marijuana itself is such a dangerous drug that it doesn't need to be a gateway. We've been told for decades that the bogeyman drugs have been LSD at one point, and then heroin and cocaine. Marijuana very rarely kills, though it can, but its main problem is this association with lifelong, incurable mental illness. People's lives are permanently ruined by it, at young age.
We will have to leave it there on that note, Peter. Thank you so much for making your case. And Mike Barnes, before you, we've got to get to the news, but thank you very much for putting your case across so passionately. Coming up, we're going to be live in Edinburgh as those protests over free speech start. But let's get your news headlines.
Tom, Emily, thanks very much, and a very good afternoon to you from the newsroom. The top stories this half hour. Plans to fine rough sleepers are provoking outrage, with more than 40 Conservative MPs said to be preparing to rebel. The new criminal justice bill would allow police to fine or to move on so-called nuisance rough sleepers. It was intended to replace the Vagrancy Act from 1824, which currently criminalises both rough sleeping and begging. But reports suggest the new bill has been paused while ministers negotiate with MPs who are concerned about the consequences of issuing fines to homeless people. The plans were introduced by the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who branded rough sleeping a lifestyle choice. Campaigners are gathering outside the Scottish Parliament in protest of new hate crime laws, which they say are a threat to free speech. The laws bring together existing legislation, making it a crime to stir up hatred against people with protected characteristics. That includes disability, age, sexual orientation, or people who are transgender. But some police forces are concerned that dealing with complaints could become a distraction for officers. The Scottish Conservatives say resources should be directed towards frontline policing. More than 250 patients a week in England may have died needlessly last year because of long waits for a hospital bed. A report by the Royal College of Emergency Medicines revealed more than 1.5 million patients waited in A&E departments for longer than 12 hours last year. The Department for Health says it's added thousands of hospital beds and insists it is, though, making progress on waiting times. And energy bills are due to fall to their lowest rate in 2 years after the regulator Ofgem's cut its price cap by 12.3%. It means the average household bill for gas and electricity will fall by around £238 over the course of a year, or about £20 a month. That's the latest from the newsroom. You can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the code on your screen, or go to our website gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, let's take a look at the markets this afternoon. The pound will buy you $1.2613 and €1.1694. The price of gold is £1,782 and 22 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is currently at 7,952 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather. Well, through the rest of the day, it's a mixed picture. Sunshine and showers, particularly in the south, some of these heavy, further pulses of rain further north. And it's all thanks to low pressure, which continues to dominate the weather pattern through the week ahead, bringing in various systems off the Atlantic, some wet and windy weather at times. For the rest of the day, this band of cloud and rain affecting parts of Northern Ireland, North Wales into Northern England, southern Scotland will remain here for much of the day. Quite cool under this. Bright skies to the north of this, some sunny spells across the Northwest Highlands, sunshine and heavy showers across the rest of England and Wales. Temperatures here in the best of the sunshine up to around 15 or 16 Celsius. Showers rumble on through into the evening time, but they do start to fade away into the early hours. This band of rain continues to affect parts of Scotland, particularly in the east, and then further showers pushing their way eastwards through the English Channel. Some of these could be heavy at times. Under clearer spells, temperatures dipping to low single figures in the countryside, but for most it will be quite a cloudy start to Tuesday. Best of the brightness across this central swathe of the UK, some mist and fog patches soon clearing away. And then through Tuesday itself, it remains quite cloudy and damp across northern and eastern parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, some bright spells, some scattered showers, and then later on in the day, some cloud and rain pushing into the southwest. Temperatures up again to the mid-teens, a little cooler in the north.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Gary King. On the M25, looking busy in both directions following an earlier broken down lorry just before junction 14 at Heathrow. In Kent, the clockwise M25, also traffic being held at the moment. Long delays around 3 miles following a car fire. It's just before Clackett Lane services. Worcestershire, northbound M5 is currently partly blocked. Delays building after an accident between junction 8 at the M50 and junction 7 at Worcester. In the West Midlands, the northbound M6, 2 lanes closed and delays after a car fire and a fuel spillage between junction 9 at Wednesbury and junction 10 at Wolverhampton. And on the trains, services are suspended on Great Western Railway and Transport for Wales services between Cardiff Central and Carmarthen due to electrical supply problems at Bridgend.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, well, it's 1:40 in the afternoon. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain, but let's return. Oh, do you want to do some views?
I think we should.
We've got lots coming in.
I think we should, just because we've had lots and lots of them coming into the inbox. And Ali has said, and this is an interesting point we didn't touch upon in the debate, if we're trying to phase out smoking, how would legalising weed be beneficial, except for those who need it for pain relief?
Well, that's true. Don't people put tobacco in it?
Well, sometimes, but I would argue that perhaps we shouldn't phase out smoking.
Yes, but Amar says, cannabis does lead to stronger drugs. My grandson started taking and selling it while at school. Now he's a heroin addict in and out of rehab. Well, there's an extreme example.
That is, but that's under the current paradigm whereby it is illegal. If he started smoking cannabis legally, not getting it through an illegal dealer, getting it at Boots isn't going to sell him heroin,
well, Alan
is it?
says it's incredibly naive to think that legalising will stop the illegal trade. The amount of stories that are told about smugglers in the 18th and 19th century, it would always be a gateway drug because there will always be an illegal trade, and that's what I think. I don't think it will stop an illegal trade.
Emily,
because people will always want a stronger product, won't they?
Is caffeine a gateway drug?
Possibly. No, it's not the same thing.
Is alcohol a gateway drug?
It's not the same thing because caffeine doesn't affect your, psychology.
Yes, it does.
It just gives you
all of these things are drugs. Some drugs are legal, some are illegal. Alcohol is a drug. Caffeine is a drug.
As marijuana.
I mean,
the strong skunk that people smoke.
It's not exactly the same. But my goodness, if we discovered caffeine, 100 years later, it would definitely be made illegal by our puritanical politicians.
Well, we'll get back to this because, as we said, we have loads of views on it. But let's return to our Scotland reporter in Edinburgh because protests are erupting outside the Scottish Parliament.
Yes, Tony Maguire is in Edinburgh for us. And Tony, what's the mood on the ground?
Why hear it from me when you can hear the roaring cheers of the people who are out here to protest? Up on stage just now is Glasgow cabbie Steph Shaw, and if you've ever tried to get a word in over a cabbie, well, you know you're on a hiding to nothing. Certainly in the mood here, people have been gathering here really for about the last 90 minutes, and Steph Shaw is indeed the first person up. He's relatively politically active here. We saw quite a lot of him last year around the time of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill protests and the public discourse that went on around that. And indeed, even by 1:30, we're certainly looking at about 300-400 people here gathered outside the Parliament. Not a lot of activity going on inside the building today, of course, because it's the bank holiday. But that bank holiday has meant that more people have been able to come here and turn out. And somebody somewhere has brought the rain with them, let it be said. But certainly here, we're just at the beginning here, lots of flags, quite a huge contingent from the Scottish Family Party, and of course the pastor, we heard from him a little bit earlier on. he from Glasgow, the East Bank Elderslie Church. Eastgate. He is going to be here and talking just after Glasgow Cabby. And of course, this is all over this highly controversial Hate Crime and Public Order Act, which has ruffled the feathers of the gender-critical feminist movement, such as J.K. Rowling, who has come out and said that she has no intentions of removing any posts in which she has misgendered people in the past, allegedly, and albeit that she says that if she did, well, that would be the greatest April Fool's joke of them all. We know that the church is already concerned with this act, this law as well, and of course the third one, which, would you believe it, is the people who are actually going to have to enforce this new law. The Police Scotland have said that they're already concerned that their police officers are stretched to the limit. They're concerned that a law like this is going to turn the public against the police, and certainly today's protest is a sign of that happening already.
Well, Tony, thank you very much for bringing us that live from the protest. We'll see if we can get back to you and some of the views from the people in the crowd a little bit later on.
Yes, hopefully the rain won't scare them off. We'll be able to listen and hear what they have to say and why they're
raining?
there.
I'm shocked.
Yes, I mean, it always... not always, but it often is.
As it is across our wonderful United Kingdom.
But, I mean, it's interesting that there's all sorts of different people outside, whether it's gender-critical feminists, whether it's the Scottish Family Party. It'd be interesting to know what their arguments are. Also, the church community, the pastor there.
The church community is interesting because religion is one of these protected characteristics within the Act that is supposed to be protected by the Act. But it seems that certainly at least some Christian churches think actually it's not. They don't want people to not be able to criticise them or whatever the intention is.
But that's the problem with the legislation, isn't it? Because if someone from the church said something negative about gay marriage, for example, or something that impacted a minority, then whose rights should be protected first when it comes to free speech? And this is the problem.
Or should we all just be allowed to say what we want to say as long as it doesn't incite violence against someone else?
Well,
wouldn't that be nice?
Sounds like common sense.
Yeah.
But hey, GBViews at gbnews.com. Coming up, the search continues. We were talking about this on Friday. The search continues for a stolen mobility van. Now, this van is essential for the care of a 13-year-old disabled boy. We're going to be joined by his mother shortly. We'll see if the police have any leads as the investigation is underway.
Now, if we look down the pointed thing with my pen, I think.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Can the Church of England not spend their money as they wish?
The Church of England can do amazing things for this country and for the world, and I'm not sure why it's chosen to focus on this specific issue. You know, one of the causes that I've always thought the Church was very good at were things called almshouses, which were basically houses that would be built on church estates for the needy. Not only did they want to spend £100 million on this fund, that they wanted to spend £1 billion on reparations as well. Well, why not spend 100 million or £1 billion on a new generation of almshouses as opposed to just helping one group of people, black British people? Why not just help all people in need?
Alex?
Well, I just don't understand what the Church of England is trying to do. It's on its deathbed.
Congregations have reduced. I mean, deathbed is maybe a little bit...
Well, look, if we look over 20 years, it's dramatically lower than it used to be. And a lot of criticism from actual Christians come from the values that the Church of England are now propagating. And Justin Welby has a lot to answer for because, you know, not only are we seeing in the news there's mass conversion of illegal immigrants to a gay mass system in the UK, but now we're seeing them spending money... And as Albie actually pointed out correctly, in a way that doesn't really benefit broader society, it benefits a very small group of people. So I just don't know where it's going to end. This committee has also said £1 million's not enough. It's 100 million, sorry.
Church commissioners are now hoping for a target of £1 billion.
I mean, it's woke nonsense, isn't it?
You could make the argument that this is charity. Justin Welby's job is to be a virtue signaller, is it not?
Should charity discriminate? I mean, that's what he's saying. We're only going to give this to people from a specific skin colour or background. I don't think that's very Christian of them.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The debate. Well, the debate on cannabis has really got you going.
Yes, it certainly has. Kathleen has written in to say, if we make cannabis legal, we will increase the number of traffic accidents and fatalities. So there's a point.
It's possible, although it will still be illegal to smoke it at the wheel or be under the influence, I'm sure. But Jay says, I think we should legalise cannabis. The government should profit from the sale of what he calls a harmless stimulant. We are not babies and shouldn't be treated as such. The issues are known about this drug, and so are those of alcohol. Alcohol is much more addictive and much more of a gateway element than any other. Well, that goes to Tom's point, speaks to Tom's point, really, doesn't it, about, you know, if some of these drugs that we accept as every day were
Could you imagine
now,
if we only discovered alcohol now and we sort of said we're going to impair the senses of everyone and make people do silly things and by the way, while you're on this, you won't be allowed to drive and all the rest of it. There is a common refrain that actually cannabis is safer than alcohol. And alcohol, you do get, you know, a small number of people who it affects in a much worse way than other people, and that's true of any drug.
Yeah, it can trigger psychosis in a small number of people. Dagmar says cannabis use does not make you violent. Again, alcohol can make you violent. The violence connected with cannabis is between the dealers who are all vying for trade. Yes, I mean, speak to any police officer and they'll tell you how the drug trade leads to violence, mostly gang violence, and of course young people being used as mules.
I'm saying, I've been told we have to move on, but honestly, there are so many views on this. We'll get to more a little bit later in the programme. But we do need to get to this story now, because police continue their search for a specially modified van stolen from Hackney in London in the early hours of Tuesday morning.
Well, there have been no official updates on the van's location following an urgent appeal on Friday.
The Carriazos van, the Carriazos, the family affected, say that the van is a lifeline for their son, a 13-year-old disabled boy who relies on the fully customised van to get to hospital appointments and access vital medical equipment.
Yes, well, Elijah's mother, Anessa Carrazio, joins us again today. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, we spoke on Friday and you were shocked and upset that this has happened to you and your family. You said you were hoping that the police will find the van, and you issued an appeal to those who have taken it. You said that you're desperate for this van back, that your son needs it desperately. Can you tell us a little bit about where the police are with this, and are you still hopeful?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank the media on how they're helping us or supporting us find the van. Thank you ever so much. We are humbled and really grateful. For the police, the Met Police have been working. As far as I'm aware, they've been actively searching since it was lost last Tuesday up to this day, yesterday. They have been still actively looking for it, but the short answer is that they haven't found it. So I don't know what else, but they haven't stopped looking for it. They're actively searching, and for that we are really grateful. If you're asking me in terms of how are we at the moment, we are still being hopeful, and even if that small window of hope, even if it's just little and even if it's very slim, hope is something that we would never give up, and we will await in faith and hope that still whoever took it will find it in their hearts to actually return it. Again, we plead that if I'm honest, and this is truthfully honest, whether do I want them to be caught, do I want them in jail, or do we want the van in a good condition left somewhere, I would really be more inclined to say, please just leave it somewhere. We're not really interested if you're locked up or what. No, we just want you to find it in your heart to actually return it back because of Elijah's life-limiting condition and how it's very difficult to transfer him from place of A to B. And to us, that's the most important thing.
Onessa, that's such an open-hearted appeal. Many people would not have the grace and compassion that you have to say what you have just done, that really you don't want to go after whoever did this just if they give up the van. It's extraordinary looking at that video of it being driven away, of it being taken from you. Just explain, if you would, how much this van has meant to you, has meant to the care of your son Elijah.
So Elijah's been given a death sentence when he was born. However, he's the boy that lived, and he's still living in a day-to-day, hour per hour. In terms of his breaths are given by the machines that he goes. So it's like an outside lungs, if you like. And without the actual safe environment for him to go from A to B, then he won't be able to see his friends, he won't be able to attend hospital appointments. But it's not all about his medical things. This van has created so many memories of whatever little life we have as a family. We only have Elijah. Myself and my husband are healthcare professionals, and we continue to serve our community through our jobs. And we would like to say to whoever did this, do you know what? We look after different types of people, regardless of who you are. If ever you get into something, I would still care for you. I would still treat you, because that's just our nature as a family. But the van is actually for us to make more memories and to be
That's
a
such
family.
a powerful message, Onessa. Thank you so much for speaking to us, and please do keep in touch and we'll help you as best we can, and we really hope that they return that van.
And if you see the van, we've got the pictures there, we've got the pictures on the GB News website. Do look out, and let's hope Onessa gets her van back. But coming up, Tories divided over their Prime Minister's plans to criminalise homelessness. What's all that about? We'll be joined by a campaigner after this.
With thanks to Variety Cruises, a family company sailing since 1942, you have the chance to win a £10,000 7-night small boat cruise for two. With flights, meals, excursions and drinks included, you'll be able to choose from any one of their 2025 Greek adventures and explore Greece like never before. Plus, you'll also win £10,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer sizzle. And we'll pack you off with these luxury travel gifts. For a chance to win a prize worth over £20,000, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB04 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 26th of April. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News.
Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It is 2 o'clock on Monday, the 1st of April. Now, the Prime Minister faces a rebellion over controversial plans to criminalise homelessness. If passed, police could be granted powers to fine or even jail nuisance rough sleepers. We'll hear from a campaigner who was once homeless himself. And Germany legalises the recreational use of cannabis today. So we've been asking, should the UK follow suit? And protests in Edinburgh are underway as Scotland's new hate crime law comes into force. This comes as some warn the new legislation could be weaponised by fringe activists and have a chilling effect on free speech.
Now, what is all of this about homelessness, the criminalisation of this idea? What is behind the idea from the government? It seems like a curious sort of policy upon first hearing.
Yes, so quote-unquote nuisance rough sleepers could be punished by law. So they're talking about fines, even jail term, moving people on at the lower end of the spectrum.
Now, this is presumably about those people who are offered accommodation and refuse it. And I suppose the government wants to have a carrot and a stick approach here, because it does seem that there are some people who do refuse the option of warm and safe accommodation when offered to them.
Well, this was Suella Braverman's very controversial comments that you're referring to, I think, because she said that it's a lifestyle choice for some people who are living rough on the street, and that caused a huge debate.
Well, I think people interpreted it as saying everyone homeless it's a lifestyle choice, which obviously it's not. Many people find themselves on the streets through no fault of their own. But I think it is fair to say that in some instances there are people who do sometimes refuse accommodation.
And there will be some circumstances, and let us know if you've been affected by this, but sometimes people have a small business, for example, and there will be a rough sleeper who is in the doorway every single day. The council aren't doing anything about it, and that is something that is very uncomfortable, but it does happen. And what do you do? What do you do?
And has the government got the right answer here? I'm not sure that they necessarily have, but be interested to hear your views on the issue. gbviews@gbnews.com.
And also, I must say, the elephant in the room, the fact that we simply do not have enough affordable housing.
Yes.
Which is leaving a lot of people, well, without a home.
Well, not enough housing, full stop.
Yeah, well,
or otherwise.
Let us know what you make of that. But your headlines with Sam next.
Tom, Emily, thanks very much and very good afternoon to you from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 2 o'clock and first we turn to Scotland, where campaigners are gathered outside the Scottish Parliament this afternoon in protest of new hate crime laws which they say are a threat to free speech. The laws bring together existing legislation, making it a crime to stir up hatred against people with protected characteristics. That includes disability, age, sexual orientation or people who are transgender. But some police forces are concerned that dealing with complaints could become a distraction for officers. The Scottish Conservatives say resources should be directed towards frontline policing. Well, we've been asking people on the streets of Edinburgh what they think about those new laws.
You're going to be going out and encouraging snitches and people to go and speak up about people just having a private conversation. You know, the key's in the word private.
The police themselves have said that they are only going to respond where complaints have been raised, and our concern would be that there are campaign groups out there that would be looking to raise complaints in order to silence people that they don't like.
That interpretation of the hate crime speech now could be used very much against us, and it's a recipe for disaster.
Well, as we've been hearing, plans to fine rough sleepers are provoking outrage, with more than 40 Conservative MPs said to be preparing to rebel. The new criminal justice bill would allow police to fine or to move on so-called nuisance rough sleepers. It was intended to replace the Vagrancy Act from 1824, which currently criminalises both rough sleeping and begging. But reports suggest the new bill has been paused while ministers negotiate with MPs who are concerned about the consequences of issuing fines to homeless people. The plans were introduced originally by the former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who branded rough sleeping a lifestyle choice. The head of the Nurses' Union has accused the government today of packing hospital corridors with patients and says that the quality of care in hospitals is not only undignified, but fatally unsafe. It comes as new estimates suggest more than 250 patients a week in England may have died needlessly last year because of long waits for a hospital bed. A report from the Royal College of Emergency Medicine revealed more than 1.5 million patients waited in A&E departments for longer than 12 hours in 2023. The Department for Health says it has added thousands of hospital beds, though, and insists it is making progress on waiting times. More than 5,400 migrants have been intercepted illegally crossing the English Channel in small boats during the first 3 months of this year. It's a record figure for that quarter, up 43% compared to the same time in 2023. Official figures from the Home Office show that 442 people made that crossing in 9 small boats just yesterday. That's despite difficult weather conditions, with lifeboats having to scramble to assist some of those arriving. Today's strong winds have now made the journey completely impassable. Some households will feel the effects of a cash boost from today as new economic policies come into effect. The national living wage is increasing to £11.44, giving a pay rise to around 3 million of Britain's lowest paid workers. Small businesses will also benefit from a raised VAT threshold and fully funded apprenticeships. Business Minister Kevin Hollinrake told GB News this morning that economic conditions are improving.
We understand it's been difficult, but things are improving. We see the economy turning a corner this year. We'll see interest rates dropping, taxes dropping, of course. £900 a year for the average person in terms of tax reductions with the national insurance cuts. So all those things are all good news to people. Of course, there's more to do, but things really are turning a corner.
And energy bills are due to fall to their lowest rate in 2 years. That's after the regulator Ofgem has cut its price cap by 12.3% today. It means the average household bill for gas and electricity will fall by around £238 over the course of a year, or around £20 a month. However, 10 million households are still being urged to submit their meter readings to avoid overpayments. And finally, a pink dress once worn by Marilyn Monroe has sold for a record-setting price. The long-sleeved silk jersey frock was owned and worn by the world's most famous film star, and it sold for just under £300,000 in Los Angeles. There was also a smoking jacket and slippers worn by Playboy founder Hugh Hefner, which went under the hammer for more than £10,000. And for the person who truly has everything, there was a chance to pick up a crypt near both of those iconic stars. The price, though, well, just under £155,000. That's the latest from the newsroom for now. For more, you can sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the QR code on your screen or go to our website, gbnews.com/alerts. Now, though, it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 2, and Rishi Sunak is facing a Conservative Party revolt over his plans to criminalise homelessness in a key crime bill this year.
Yes, the bill would give police the power to fine or move on so-called nuisance rough sleepers.
Well, they say it will encourage rough sleepers to make use of accommodation services and mental health support. But with more than 40 Conservative suspected rebels against the plans, including people like Damien Green and even Ian Duncan Smith, is this the right move for Rishi to keep?
Well, joining us now is a homelessness campaigner who spent some time sleeping rough himself as a teenager, Matthew Torbett. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us. I mean, let's look at the premise of this bill. How many rough sleepers are sleeping rough as a choice? There seems to be an implication here that there are many people who are sleeping on the streets because they almost want to.
Yeah, I think that's clearly the message that certain elements of the Home Office are wanting to put out. I think from my own experience, homelessness is a very complex thing, and how people become rough sleepers in the first place is a very complex thing. Normally, it's very rarely somebody's fault. It can be a family relationship breakdown, it could be a divorce, it can be a Section 21 no-fault eviction. And in my time being homeless for around 12 months, I met one person who decided he wanted to live a nomadic life and was going to be staying on the streets and living off-grid. But the idea that people want to be sleeping on the streets is just neither here nor there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair point to make, that for the vast majority of people sleeping rough, it's not a choice, it's not what they want to do. If they were offered accommodation, they would want to take that up in a stable way. I suppose there is a fair point, though, that there are some people who do refuse accommodation when it is offered to them. And looking at it through that lens, does there need to be some sort of stick as well as a carrot, or is that counterproductive?
I think the idea of criminalising it further is neither a stick or a carrot, to be perfectly honest with you. I think people need support and assistance. If people are refusing that for whatever reason, there may be further support or assistance needed, or maybe there's only so much you can do for some people. But if this was going to solve the problem, it would be solved already, because this is nothing new. These powers already exist within the 2014 Antisocial Behaviour Act. So this is nothing new. When have you ever seen the police unable to move somebody on if they're a so-called nuisance? And I think really my concern is it speaks to the constant dehumanisation of rough sleepers as some sort of problem, when really, if you ask the majority of people that walk past homeless people, there's a sense of helplessness and you would want to help them rather than have them imprisoned.
Matthew, do you accept the term nuisance rough sleeper?
No, I think it's nobody likes to see this stuff, right? None of us walk past homeless people and enjoy seeing that. I think, therefore, you have to look to a more compassionate and empathetic way forward. And the other thing is that the stipulations within this bill are so broad, it's totally open to interpretation. So if you want to talk about nuisance beggars, well, that could easily be charity chuggers with their buckets asking people for money and people obviously running off and not wanting to do it. It could be carol singers falling foul of it, trying to raise money by singing and people not enjoying that. And the most horrific one of them all, the idea that excessive smell is worth a £2,500 fine or a potential prison sentence is again not solving the problem.
Yeah, it does seem extraordinary that the government is saying there could be these £2,500 fines. I can't imagine that many homeless people have £2,500 spare to be able to pay such a fine. Matthew, would you mind talking about your own personal circumstances and how you ended up homeless and also how you got out of that situation?
Yeah, so mine was a family breakdown situation. You know, me and my parents didn't always get on growing up, and I therefore was homeless and spent 12 months sleeping on the streets of Manchester, and you know, ended up on the wrong side of the law briefly. I was essentially groomed into a gang. I was only a teenager, and I'd have done anything to put a roof over my head. The way I got out of it, and the thing that I will always say to people, is it's support and education. So I had this my best friend's mum, called Dawn, amazing. I call her my guardian angel. She took me in and she said, "You're not a daft lad. Get yourself to college, go and get your GCSEs and then go to university." And without that constant support, I don't know where I would have gone, and I don't know where people would go. So for me, the idea is wrapping your arms around people, showing them there's another way and showing them that there's hope, actually, because the worst part of being homeless, anyone will tell you, is waking up in the morning. Because after those first couple of seconds of coming out of your sleep from whatever you've been dreaming about, you realise where you are and what is going on again, and the true reality of it all.
And Matthew, just lastly, what do you think the government should do about rough sleepers who are deemed a nuisance? So, for example, there may be a rough sleeper who's perhaps a little aggressive, may have drug or alcohol issues, may be causing a nuisance, by example, by sleeping outside someone's front door and making it very difficult for them to access their home or something like that, or outside a small business and perhaps scaring off customers or that sort of thing, because often the councils aren't very good at getting involved and moving people on and providing the support always. Do you think there does need to be an element of, I don't know, what do you see the solution is if this isn't it?
So the solution for me, there's two things there. So if somebody's being violent, that's antisocial behaviour. We don't need a new act for that. So, if anybody's violent, you're arrested and processed accordingly. Now, if you're homeless, the idea that arresting somebody regardless is going to solve it isn't. What Finland do very well and have done is something called housing first, whereby if you've got mental health issues or a substance abuse issue, alcohol, whatever it might be, and you're on the streets, rather than try and go through a programme to get to a point where you can go into accommodation, they put you in a house and give you the wraparound care at the same time. Finland at this current juncture has virtually zero homelessness and has shown over the last 3 decades how it can be done. The government have actually trialled housing first in Manchester and in Liverpool, and the results are there for all to see. So why they're considering continuing down this path rather than a housing first path is nonsensical, to put it bluntly.
Housing first is such an interesting idea. It's something that actually George Bush in the United States also really, really pushed and seemed to have some successes. But Matthew, thank you so much for sharing your story. Really, really interesting points there, especially how individuals can be the path out, really.
Yes, well, in other news, demands are growing for Labour's deputy leader, Angela Rayner, to face a full police probe into her council house tax row.
Yes, this comes as conversations around the sale of Rayner's council house a decade ago continues to heat up, with the deputy Labour leader saying she denies any wrongdoing, but questions remaining. Joining us now is the political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heal. James, can you just break down precisely what the argument is over here?
Sure, Tom. So this is about the sale of Angela Rayner's former council home in 2015, and the argument really is about how much tax she paid on that house and whether she was in line with all laws at the time, because according to this new book, which has been published by Lord Ashcroft, the former deputy party chairman of the Conservative Party, there are concerns perhaps that she was not being completely forthcoming about which house she was living in at the time. She had one house where she registered it on the electoral register, and yet at the same time, she was also appearing to be living at another place, according to local residents in Manchester. And therefore, this has sparked a whole row, with the Conservatives now demanding that she be very forthcoming about the tax advice she received. And Rayner has been going out saying that the tax advice she's received suggests that she hasn't broken any rules. But of course, she's not willing to share that tax advice. And I think what's really complicating this whole story, Tom, is not just about the backstory of Angela Rayner, but because as deputy leader, she has been so quick to criticise others about their tax arrangements, very leading the charge against Boris Johnson in January 2022 over Partygate, and therefore the concern is about whether she has been completely forthcoming here, and I think that's why we're in now month 3, it's now 1st of April, and still these questions are not going away anytime soon.
Yes, and now we have this ex-ethics advisor, Sir Alistair Graham, getting involved and calling for a full inquiry, a full police probe, is what The Sun is calling it today. I mean, the police are already looking into this, aren't they?
Yeah, so it's a kind of two-step process, really, which is that Greater Manchester Police are reassessing their decision not to open an investigation, and if that comes back and they think they should actually, upon reassessment, go for that investigation, then there'll be an investigation, and then, of course, they'll decide if she's done anything wrong. But I think today's Alistair Graham's intervention is notable, partly because, of course, his interventions have been so critical of the Conservatives over the past 3 or 4 years. And on those occasions, Labour have been quick to amplify Sir Alistair Graham's claims and noted, for instance, that he was the former chairman of the Committee on Standards in Public Life under Tony Blair. And so now it seems that, the boot is on the other foot. And, of course, they want Labour to be equally kind of transparent and forthcoming and to hold the same standards that they've been very quick to demand of others when it comes to the Conservatives in the past 4 years or so.
It seems that the Labour Party might spot an issue here, because Sir Keir Starmer has continually said he hasn't looked at this tax advice. He doesn't need to look at this tax advice because Angela Rayner has said that that's the tax advice and he believes her and takes her at her word. Is he just covering his own back here? If the police do find against Angela Rayner, he can say, well, I didn't see the tax advice.
That's a good point.
How could I possibly know? And he can sort of insulate himself from this scandal.
Well, I mean, that was so striking, really, about the Labour local election launch last week, was that Keir Starmer was saying, I haven't seen the advice. Some of his language was careful to sort of distance himself in some ways. But then afterwards, it was briefed that his advisors had seen it. And, of course, this is from the man who's made a great
His advisors, not him
play out of
personally. So he can throw his advisors under the bus. That's no problem. But he himself is insulated.
Well, quite, and as a former director of public prosecutions who doesn't actually want to look at the evidence and suggesting that there's nothing to see here really, and it doesn't really fit with the kind of forensic Elliot Ness image that he's tried to craft over the recent years. So you're quite a striking one, and that's why the questions aren't going away, Tom, because basically there's been 3 months of this now, and still questions are yet to be answered, and that advice has not been shown publicly.
Yes, you would have thought forensic Keir Starmer would want to go through the tax advice line by line.
But also, Keir Starmer built his reputation saying when he was investigated over the beers he had in Durham during COVID, if the police find against me, I'll resign. He said that, and he built a reputation on the back of that.
Yeah.
Why doesn't Angela Rayner say something similar? If the police find against me, I'll resign. That would show that she has real confidence in her position.
Yes, it's interesting, your theory, that perhaps he's trying to insulate himself by not looking at the tax advice. Although, can he do that if his advisors have already read it?
He can easily sack an advisor.
Yeah, true.
He can easily just say, that's not me, that's an advisor, they advised me incorrectly. That's their fault, that's not my fault.
Well, there we go. Forensic
James Heal
or
there, the political
slippery
correspondent at The Spectator.
Well, in other news, the Met Police are under fire after an officer appears to excuse a swastika at a pro-Palestine rally. Now, we're going to be speaking to an activist who himself has been arrested at one of these London rallies after this short break.
I'm Gloria Di Piero. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Is the brand of toothpaste super important here, or is it more about the toothbrush? Because I was told a long time ago by my dentist, electric toothbrush, Pip, that is the way to go.
You're exactly right. I mean, the action of mechanically removing plaque, so using a brush, is much more effective than the brand of toothpaste itself. But in terms of the ingredient in toothpaste that we're looking for, it's something called fluoride. And fluoride is essential to help remineralize and strengthen our teeth. It's really important to use a toothpaste with fluoride. And in terms of brushing, using an electric toothbrush is just much easier. You know, you're brushing your teeth first thing in the morning, last thing at night. You're going to be a bit tired in those times. So using an electric toothbrush, you just hold it against your tooth and gum and it does all the work for you. So it's just much easier in my opinion.
But you have to use your electric toothbrush properly.
You're exactly right. Yeah, there is a technique of actually brushing your teeth, although it sounds really simple. With an electric toothbrush, you have to hold it against the tooth and the gum. Ideally, you want a pressure sensor in that toothbrush so you know exactly when you're pressing too hard. But if you're using a manual toothbrush, you need to move it around and small circular motions. But actually what I see is people who use manual toothbrushes, they tend to over scrub and over brush, which can actually lead to gum recession and your enamel thinning long term.
Sometimes I will get up in the morning and I will have breakfast and then I'll brush my teeth. Is that wrong?
Unfortunately, that's wrong. So the best time to brush your teeth is first thing in the morning, as soon as you wake up. If you're brushing after you eat and after breakfast, you're brushing your teeth in that weakened acidic state. So your teeth are actually under attack and they're much more vulnerable.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Patrick Christie's, this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 24 minutes past 2, and now I have to say a lot of you have an opinion on the legalisation or otherwise of marijuana. And Jerry has written in to say, I'm a regular cannabis user for over 30 years. I was a regular cannabis user for over 30 years. Never had the urge to try anything else, only gave it up because I stopped smoking. No mental health problems, no violent tendencies, happily retired now and still in good health.
We'll take your word for it, Jerry.
But no, I think Jerry raises a good point, right? There are, of course, terrible side effects from using any drug for a minority of people, but for any drug, whether it be alcohol, caffeine, nicotine or marijuana, there are people who can use it with no problems as well.
And it is unfortunately linked to things like schizophrenia and other psychosis. Charlie says it does cross the blood-brain barrier, and drug rehabilitation centres often remark upon it being a precursor to abuse of serious stimulant drugs such as amphetamines and cocaine.
Well, Chris says, having previously worked for several years as a nurse on wards for the acutely unwell psychiatric patients, I can attest that many have had to be sectioned for their own safety, and that of others, suffered from drug-induced psychosis, mostly marijuana. Every effort should be made to discourage use of this drug. But Chris, again, on this issue, where we see problems in society today, these are problems associated with the prohibition of marijuana.
Well,
they're not necessarily problems of
I'm not sure about that, though.
a legal situation, because we don't have a legal situation.
I'm not sure about that, because people, as I said before, will always seek out a stronger product, and that will be on the black market.
Will they always seek out a stronger product?
And things mixed with other products. Paul says, Mo, this is an interesting one. Whoever chooses to take drugs, including alcohol, food, cannabis, etc., including cigarettes, should not be cared for by the NHS. I have nursed for years and have been abused during those years by people who have chosen to use these tools by way of recreation. Stop pandering to the minority. Mo, I mean, apart from food, although I presume you mean high sugar, fat food, junk food that people can get addicted to, or so it's claimed. But yes, it's a good point. I'm not sure you're right, though, but it's worth raising that people do behave badly in hospitals because they're addicts. If you do a
risky activity, should you be denied healthcare? I mean, if you choose to go bungee jumping and you accidentally get injured, I mean, do you then not get access to the NHS?
No, but there is a question over, personal responsibility.
Here's one, horse riding. Professor David Nutt, who was the drugs advisor under Gordon Brown and was fired from his job, he said that ecstasy was safer than horse riding, and statistically it's true.
Well, fewer people take ecstasy.
No, as a proportion of those who do, as a proportion of those who horse ride versus those who take ecstasy.
Yes,
more
but all the other
horse
societal
riding.
Problems that come with the use of Class A drugs probably outweigh that. So that's a silly point from Dr. Nutt.
Well, Dr. Nutt was fired by the Labour government for saying the correct science.
Anyway, moving on. No, but that's rubbish. It ignores everything else. Are swastikas ever acceptable? Well, a Met Office officer policing a pro-Palestine protest over the weekend was filmed telling a Jewish woman that using the symbol could be acceptable when taken into context. Let's have a listen.
You'd like to walk with me because I can point these people out to you. And again, I was told when I asked that a swastika was not necessarily anti-Semitic or disruptive to public worship. That doesn't seem right to me.
Everything needs to be taken within context, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's a context of that. Why does why does this swastika need context?
What exactly are you confused about?
What I'm confused is how you don't, in what context the swastika is not anti-Semitic. This is what I want to know. Because again,
I suppose, I don't know how everybody would feel about that site. That has happened. I'm here working to the branch commander, and it is not my responsibility, unfortunately, my role, to walk down the road.
Really interesting exchange there, and it did seem that the policeman was perhaps in a bit of a muddle in terms of what the rules were, what the law was, and what should be happening. But let's discuss this more with Niak Gobani, an Iranian activist who was arrested at an anti-Israel march for having a sign saying Hamas is terrorist. Now, thank you so much for joining us. I suppose, can you just first explain the atmosphere on some of these rallies? Because I suppose you turn up with a message that is, of course, the law, that any Western country would say is the law. But I suppose the police do sort of want to maintain peace and stop disturbances. And that's what you sometimes run up against.
So first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I'm so happy to speak with the young generation here in UK, in TV, same as you guys. And look, I'm always going to pro-Palestinian march, and I see what's going on exactly, and I know, that 2 days ago when I was in this march, I'm jumping in front of Jeremy Corbyn and show my sign without any, shouting or any saying bad word or something. I'm just silent, show my sign, and someone behind Jeremy Corbyn come and really attacked me and pushed me back. And the police come and, remove me from front of march and move me in the work site, and they try to get information from me and say, okay, give your name and address. I say, okay, look around you. I think the police are not, exactly brief, and they don't know exactly what they want to do. They just think, they just come there, and when something happened between two groups, they just remove one of the...
Do you feel that there is a two-tier level of policing on these protests? That people like you holding up signs that say Hamas is a terrorist organisation will be moved on by the police, and perhaps less attention will be paid to those holding up signs with swastikas on them?
Yeah, exactly. The police, I spoke with a police officer, which was front of me after this happening. When the police arrested me, for the second time, they arrested me, and, we are moved here in this, the place, which is police officer right now stand. The Israeli, British and Iranian was there, and with the sign, Hamas is terrorist, simple sign, it's a UK law. And, the police officer always, every minute told me, in the beginning, told me, look, you are safe now. We give you opportunity to stand here and show your opinion. I tell him, look, it's not my opinion. It's UK law. My opinion, it's maybe too, radical, but I'm just coming with this with the UK law. You don't understand what's going on exactly here. I think
Nayak, I think that is one of the key points here, that some of these police officers appear to be completely out of their depth. But thank you very much, Nayak Gobani. Really great to speak to you. You're an Iranian activist who was arrested at an anti-Israel march for having a sign saying Hamas is terrorist.
Well, we should say that the Metropolitan Police say that they did arrest the individual holding the sign with the swastika on it at this particular protest over the weekend. Although, and they say that the clip that we looked at there was just a section of a 10-minute long conversation. Though clearly some of the things that were said in that conversation were a little
dismissive,
insistence
let's say.
and dismissive.
Dismissive. Well, coming up, a certain London council, get this, could be raking in a whopping £1 million a month from a low-traffic neighbourhood enforcement. Is this fair on motorists?
Tom, Emily, thanks very much and good afternoon from the newsroom. The headlines at just after 2:30. Campaigners are now gathered outside the Scottish Parliament in protest of new hate crime laws, which they say are a threat to free speech. Author J.K. Rowling took to social media to criticise the new legislation, saying that if her gender-critical comments fall foul of the new law, she looks forward to being arrested, she said. The bill makes it a crime to stir up hatred against people with protected characteristics, including disability, age, sexual orientation, or people who are transgender. Plans to fine rough sleepers are provoking outrage, with more than 40 Tory MPs said to be preparing to rebel. The new criminal justice bill would allow police to fine or to move on so-called nuisance rough sleepers. It was intended to replace the Vagrancy Act from 1824, which currently criminalises both rough sleeping and begging. But reports suggest the new bill has been paused while ministers negotiate with MPs who are concerned about the consequences of issuing fines to homeless people. More than 250 patients each week in England may have died needlessly last year because of long waits for a hospital bed. A report by the Royal College of Emergency Medicines revealed that more than 1.5 million patients waited in emergency departments for longer than 12 hours in 2023. The Department for Health says that it has, though, added thousands of hospital beds and insists it is making progress on waiting times. And energy bills are due to fall to their lowest rate in 2 years after the regulator Ofgem has cut its price cap by 12.3%. It means the average household bill for gas and electricity will fall by around £238 over the course of a year, or around £20 each month. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts. Just scan the QR code there on your screen. Or if you're listening on radio, go to our website, gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather. Well, through the rest of the day, it's a mixed picture. Sunshine and showers, particularly in the south. Some of these heavy, further pulses of rain further north. And it's all thanks to low pressure, which continues to dominate the weather pattern through the week ahead, bringing in various systems off the Atlantic, some wet and windy weather at times. For the rest of the day, this band of cloud and rain affecting parts of Northern Ireland, North Wales into northern England, southern Scotland will remain here for much of the day. Quite cool under this. Bright skies to the north of this, some sunny spells across the northwest Highlands, sunshine and heavy showers across the rest of England and Wales. Temperatures here in the best of the sunshine up to around 15 or 16 Celsius. Showers rumble on through into the evening time, but they do start to fade away into the early hours. This band of rain continues to affect parts of Scotland, particularly in the east, and then further showers pushing their way eastwards through the English Channel. Some of these could be heavy at times. Under clearer spells, temperatures dipping to low single figures in the countryside, but for most it will be quite a cloudy start to Tuesday. Best of the brightness across this central swathe of the UK, some mist and fog patches soon clearing away. And then through Tuesday itself, it remains quite cloudy and damp across northern and eastern parts of Scotland. Elsewhere, some bright spells, some scattered showers, and then later on in the day, some cloud and rain pushing into the southwest. Temperatures up again to the mid-teens, a little cooler in the north.
The latest GB News travel. Good afternoon, I'm Samantha Dean. In Cumbria, the M6 southbound's queuing, one lane's closed. It's due to an overturned van at junction 45 at Gretna Green. In West Yorkshire, the M62 westbound, one lane's closed, queuing traffic due to an accident from junction 22 Rushworth Moor to 21 Milne Row. In the West Midlands, the M6 northbound, two lanes are closed, queuing traffic due to a spillage of diesel and an earlier vehicle fire. That's between junction 9 Wednesbury and junction 10 Wolverhampton. Congestion to junction 7 at Great Bar. And in Surrey, the M25 clockwise, long delays, one lane closed, queuing traffic for 6 miles due to a car fire. That's before Clackett Lane services. Congestion to a mile, junction 4 Orpington, and also lane 1 closed a mile after junction 5.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it is 2:38 in the afternoon. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, low traffic neighbourhoods in London are still having a major impact on motorists. Previously unseen figures show Hammersmith and Fulham, for one, issued more than 340,000 penalty charge notices in less than 1 year. Now, that raked in £1 million per month from motorists.
Yeah, that's 341,000 fines at around 35 quid, £12 million clean for the year. Goodness me, is this just a cash cow, or are people just not understanding the rules? Well, joining us now is motoring journalist Danny Kelly. And Danny, you can't deny that for people that live within low-traffic neighbourhoods, they quite like them.
Well, it's divisive, Tom. In Birmingham, where I'm speaking to you from this afternoon, it's fairly divisive. Yes, if you're a pedestrian, if you don't have a car, then yes, it's a great idea. But if you're a pedestrian with a car, then maybe it's not such a great idea. Now, the problem with this LTN in Hammersmith and Fulham, Tom and Emily, is that they don't have to prevent people using these streets as rat runs. They don't have physical obstructions like they do in a lot of other LTNs. Now, that is incredibly contentious, because anything that physically obstructs, for example, an ambulance or a police car getting down the streets, well, obviously that could have negative consequences. So what they have in this part of London, in this particular borough, is they have ANPR cameras, automatic number plate recognition cameras. So that means if you're an out-of-towner, if you like, who is trying to use 4 or 5 of these rat runs that Hammersmith Council wants you not to use, then if your number plate isn't actually registered, then you're going to get walloped with a fine. And of course, that begs the question, if you're having a delivery, if you're ordering, like, I don't know, a fridge from Curry's or something, then the Curry's delivery driver has got to get down your road. And unless they actually put their reg number on this ANPR system, they're going to get walloped with a fine. And not everybody is comfortable with technology. We mustn't forget that there are older people who don't necessarily have smartphones or broadband, and then they've got a 24-hour hotline. It's very messy, it's very complicated. And before the break, Emily, you asked a question, this is a very straightforward question. Is it fair or unfair on the motorists? And I think it's unfair on the motorists.
Well, Danny, also, if I were a council and I looked at the statistics, the data that I've got, and saw that we were dishing out 341,000 fines, I'd probably think, maybe we're not actually advertising this as much as we could. Perhaps we're not letting people know in a clear enough way. But no, I imagine they're not thinking that. I imagine they're thinking, lots of money.
Yeah, I think it's fair to be cynical about what motivates these councillors, Emily and Tom. I really do. You know, councils are skint. Councils are cash-strapped. And I know over the last 4 or 5 years what councils are prepared to do to compensate for that lack of money from council tax. Birmingham City Council, they followed London's ULEZ. It's not quite the £12.50 a day to drive through, but it's an £8 fine if you're driving a non-compliant car. Motorists are being hammered, and you're shown some fabulous, tranquil photographs of inner-city London streets where the kids are playing safely and they can knock a football around without a car coming down the road at 50 miles an hour to knock them down. And that's a great thing. But let's not also be naive, because if you can't get down that street to get to your destination, then all you're doing is removing the problem to somebody else's street. And the leafy suburbs of Hammersmith and Fulham, the real wealthy parts, they're the roads that are benefiting.
Yeah,
and the people who are living on the main roads, who aren't as wealthy and affluent, they're the ones that are now having to face with the thousands more cars driving past their front door. And of course, if we're trying to cut down on pollution, all we're doing is pushing the problem to that road rather than these 5 or 6 leafy roads.
And I suppose there's a double issue with the Hammersmith and Fulham areas that you describe, without planters, without physical roadblocks, trying to rely solely on technology for some of these areas. Well, you don't make the street safe then for children either. You're not winning on either account. You're fining people because people don't realise they're going into a zone. They're driving through the street, so the street's not actually particularly quieter than it was before. Children can't run without supervision or whatever. It's almost like there's no win on either side of this policy there.
Well, the council, according to their website, Tom, they've actually reduced the traffic by, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 per day. So they would argue that it's successful as far as that is concerned. So pedestrian safety has indeed increased. But just going back to an earlier point, pedestrian safety has decreased on the areas that those cars who do know that they can't drive down 5 or 6 roads without a fine, that pedestrian safety has decreased because they've got to go somewhere. Those cars still need to get to that destination. And again, it's the wealthy, affluent, leafy suburbs or the leafy roads that have benefited.
I think that's a very important point. You've got Jill and John in their £2 million terraced house that's on their street that's just been turned into an LTN, and now it's lovely. They don't have to deal with cars going down their road. But next door, there's a main road that is now congested the entire time. If you're a businessman, if you're a white van man, you can't get anywhere. If you're a freelance hairdresser, you can't get anywhere in time.
You might have Quentin or Barnaby deciding not to take the 4x4 out for the little drive to the shop just at the end of the street. They might walk instead. You might remove the car from the road and create a walking journey.
I think you're living in hypotheticals, though, there, Tom, because the evidence suggests that that is not happening, and that what you're seeing is just other roads becoming more and more congested, and people are not able to get from A to B.
Like for like. Not every single car that doesn't go down one road has to go on another road. People might choose a different
You're not a motorist. You're not a driver. You're not a driver.
Choose a different
You're not a driver, Tom.
Of travel.
Well, in other news, illegal small boat crossings in the English Channel are up by 43% on the same period last year. Rishi Sunak, you know, he's come out many times saying, oh, no, small boats are down, and they were a bit down last year, but it seems like not anymore. Will anything solve Britain's small boat crisis? Sorry, I didn't realise that was a T.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
I like to call this one robbing Peter to pay Paul. The Labour Party have embarked on a journey that I can only describe as politics of envy. I think it's time we scrutinise their policies more closely and establish in our minds what a Labour government might mean to the education system. Sir Keir Starmer and his party have for far too long capitalised on the abject failure of the Conservatives and haven't really had to explain themselves. But as part of their manifesto, Labour intend to charge VAT at 20% on private schools because I suspect they think that people who send their kids there will stump up the cash no matter what, and that these people have money. They will then use this money, Labour, to fund state schools. Basically, they will rob Peter to pay Paul. But what I believe they've failed to realise, I'm not sure whether they've factored this in, is that many people who send their kids to private schools do so at great sacrifice and are in fact paying twice into the education system. I spent my first year of secondary education in a state school. I'll be honest, when I started I was at the top of the class, but by the end of the year I was near the bottom. But then my dad got promoted to a post on Wall Street in the States. My parents sent me to a private boarding school in the UK run by nuns, and my family moved to America. Thank God for the opportunity I was given to go private. At boarding school I grew in confidence, and I'm here now because of it. My father's work, NatWest, and a loan my dad took out paid for my private education. We were nowhere near as rich as some of the kids there, but there are also many children, I would say at least half, whose parents were busting a gut to send them there. It is clear that the state education system is failing, but rather than robbing Peter to pay Paul, surely it would be better for the party to improve the state system without destroying the private sector.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Well, it's 2:48, and the number of illegal small boat crossings in the English Channel is up by 43% on the same period last year.
Well, official Home Office figures report that a total of 791 Channel migrants reached UK waters in 16 small boats over the Easter weekend.
Well, in light of these shocking new figures, shall we take a listen to what Rishi Sunak had to say at the end of last year?
But the British people's patience can only be stretched so thin, and they expect the boats to be stopped. That is why I made it one of my 5 priorities. And whatever our critics might say, we are making progress.
Well, that was true last year. Last year, the number of small boat arrivals was down by over a third. This year, however, the tide has started to go the other way. Let's speak to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, for the details. And Mark, you started picking up on this before just about anyone else.
Yeah, and I think it's very significant now, Tom, because we are at the point where we have actually seen a full reversal here, where the 36% reduction in small boats coming across the Channel last year has been flipped around, so that actually even more than that, now 43% more are coming across the English Channel than last year. Again, yesterday, 9 boats that came across the Channel. We got some video we want to show you. This was shot by one of those on board, one of the small boats that made it in fairly treacherous conditions. And what it shows, the video, which we'll repeat for you, is on that boat, amongst others, are quite a significant number of Vietnamese. And, you know, Vietnam, the last time I was there on holiday, wasn't a particularly hot war zone, as far as I remember. And this is one of the difficulties that the government is up against, because they say anyone, of course, from the likes of Vietnam, surely has no right to claim asylum in the UK, but it will still have to be processed like the other almost 800 who came across this very busy weekend. And I think the reason that it's so significant now, the flipping of this number, is that the government and Rishi Sunak was able to say at various points last year, as it was turning in their favour, that look what we're doing, we are getting there. OK, not immediately, but we're making the difference. We're reducing the number of boats coming across till it ended at 36% last year. We're only a quarter of the way now into the new year, 2024, and already it's 43% more. The government can't say that anymore. It might turn around and say, oh, well, judge us on the end of the year. But of course, during the course of last year, they were only too willing to come out at news conference after news conference throughout that year and tell us how well they were doing. By the same degree, then, they have to be able to take the criticism now that will be levelled at them, that this is a complete reversal and failure of that same policy.
I mean, Mark, are we taken by surprise by the fact that now Vietnamese nationals are crossing the Channel?
What we see from year to year is that there is often a change. Sometimes it's Afghans and Iranians. In fact, they're always pretty much well represented. But there are various other countries as well. Turkish nationals, for instance, have been coming across in ever greater numbers. And yes, all those groups from Southeast Asia as well. Vietnam, China are significantly represented. And those that actually watch the way in which these illegals come across the channel will tell you that this is clearly, to them anyway, an example of economic migration and not an example of people who are fleeing war-torn countries to get here for asylum.
Vietnam, of course, a fast-growing economy, a member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP. China, the second largest economy in the world. It's extraordinary that people will be fleeing these countries that economically are not actually, or even.
Surely that's got to put.
If we say that Vietnam and China are now akin to Afghanistan,
oh my goodness,
or I don't know, any sort of failed state around the world, what country isn't? Then
there will still be people. There will still be people who say everyone crossing in a dinghy in one of these boats must be, have been persecuted in their home country, must be an asylum seeker. There will be people who continue to argue that, even when it becomes more and more clear to most people that actually there are a lot of people who are just economic migrants, just would prefer to live here. And where they're from.
Well, the UN Convention on Refugees that we signed up to in the 1950s, that we helped draft, that we helped write, does theoretically give the right of potentially hundreds of millions or billions of people that theoretical right to move to the UK. It rather undermines any sense of migration control, and then it means that you have to have these peculiar deterrence policies rather than border control policies.
I don't suppose we have a returns agreement with Vietnam either.
No, I don't think we do.
Well, that's it from us for today. But up next, don't fear, it is Martin Dobney. Martin, thank you very much. What's coming up on your show then?
Thank you very much, guys. Well, the Tories are at war with reform with no sign of a pact in sight now. The parties are tearing chunks out of each other as 50 seats could be lost thanks to reform. Scottish hate crime bill. Will everybody in Scotland end up getting arrested? The war on boys continues as a new report shows. White working class lads are at the bottom and yet nobody is sticking up for them. And fantastic news. Thank you, GB News viewers, because the Batley Grammar School fundraiser has now reached the £100,000 mark. All that money goes direct to the teacher, thanks to you. So that's all coming up at 3 till 6. But first, it's time for your latest weather forecast.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather. It's a mixed picture out there, and over the next few days it remains very similar, unsettled, further spells of rain, but there will be some warm sunshine at times. Looking at the pressure pattern, low pressure systems moving in from the Atlantic, bringing spells of rain, some stronger winds, particularly later on in the week. But there will be some sunny spells in between, which is what we've seen across parts of England and Wales today. These showers should slowly fade away. However, we will see further spells of rain across parts of Scotland into northern England, particularly in the east, some of this heavy at times. In between, there will be some clear spells, and this will allow temperatures to dip down into low single figures. So perhaps a touch of light frost in the countryside for one or two of us, but for most, it's a cloudy start to Tuesday. Further showers in places. This rain across eastern Scotland remains here for much of the day. A little brighter across the far north. Some sunny spells developing across much of the UK as we move through into the afternoon, but a scattering of showers. Towards the southwest, this band of cloud and rain will push in, and temperatures overall reaching the mid-teens in the south, still chilly across Scotland, 7 or 8 degrees. Taking a look at Wednesday, the next day